your smile. Now the sunshine brings the light. Fill me out with a flame. I will let you in this game. Take me out when I'm down. 'Cause with you I'm safe and sound. 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 Take me out when I'm down. 'Cause with you I'm safe and sound. 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 I'm safe and sound.
When you shop Amazon.com, there's a good chance you're buying from an independent seller like Adrienne. Her business, Blue Henry, was drowning in orders. Then she got a loan from Amazon to grow her space and her staff.
Life Extension partners with me to make sure that I have everything I need.
They've researched, done the work, and are trusted.
I feel confident in knowing that I'm getting the best possible product for my body.
So if you need a professional to help you with your health,
connect with a brand that cares about the science behind your health.
And find the right supplement for you.
There we go. Oh man, my back is so fucked up. I need to figure something out with it. I went and got it popped in by the chiropractor today, but the muscles in it are just so sore from it being out for so long that it keeps like pulling it back out, you know? So I don't know what to do with it. I've been trying to stretch every night too, but I don't know, hopefully that'll help. Hopefully it'll not go back out again. Because it's making me not like want to get out of bed. Oh man, I'm getting too fucking old. But anyways, did you guys see that in the news on Sunday during the Super Bowl? I didn't watch the Super Bowl, but during the Super Bowl, Israel bombed Rafah. I think that's how you pronounce it. Yeah, Rafah. I think that it was planned for them to do it during the Super Bowl so that a bunch of people wouldn't be paying attention to the news. And they almost got away with it too. Scooby-Doo meme. Oh man. Yeah, also Meta is trying to ban the word Zionism now off of Facebook and Instagram, which is fucking crazy. But anyways, let's get into what we do every stream. We watch a sermon on the Bible passage of the week. This week's is Psalm 23. So we'll watch that, and we'll play a game of Risk.
As we've been looking at the story of Ezra and Nehemiah, the pattern of our ancient immigration back to the...
I'm going to read the 23rd Psalm, and then we're going to pray, and then see what the Lord has for us, okay? It goes like this. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, God, for your word. Now, as we unpack some of these verses here today and just meditate on them this morning, would you please increase our understanding? Give us wisdom and application as well, Lord God, into your word. We ask it in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. If you had the task of finding a metaphor to describe your relationship with God, I'm kind of curious, not that I'm asking you to speak out right now, but what metaphor you might use. Because that is exactly what David is doing in the 23rd Psalm. He's using a metaphor to describe his relationship with the God, and not surprisingly, he uses the one of a shepherd
Yeah.
and his sheep. I say not surprisingly because we know that is what David did. He was involved in shepherding his father's sheep as a young man. And so
I mean,
he
that-
obviously knew, and he understood
That is like the most common metaphor also for it. So
the dynamic of that kind of a relationship and what it entails. I've never shepherded real sheep with the kind with 4 legs, only you guys with 2 legs. But I've heard there's a lot of similarities. We'll talk about that later anyway. Anyway, I shared that up
When
at
his
McCall,
line-
and some
when his
people kind of
turn
looked
is
at me
done, I'll
sideways, a little bit. But
send him.
anyway, the very first thing you're going to notice about what David says related to this opening statement of this psalm is that it is personal. Notice he says, "The Lord is my shepherd."
my shepherd.
Now that's significant because he could have made a doctrinal statement and said, "The Lord is a shepherd." He could have even made it a little more, emphatic by saying, "The Lord is the shepherd." But he didn't. He made it personal. He made it intimate. The Lord is my shepherd. And I think that's a fairly significant statement to make because one of the most powerful characteristics of the God that you and I serve is the fact that
Okay,
he is
so he
personal,
wants to get up into there.
and that we can have a personal relationship with him. We in evangelical Christianity, we've thrown that term around
Weird.
a lot, and we've almost kind of redefined what
I guess I don't know
relationship
where-
means, and we've used it to describe simply a Christian who's come to faith, and we'll say to somebody, "Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ?" And we kind of just shoot that out there real quick. And what that means essentially in our brains is, have you accepted Christ as your Savior? It doesn't necessarily mean that the person asking the question even has a personal relationship with Jesus, because you see, it's possible to know the Lord in the sense of salvation and not really know him in intimate fellowship. And I think there's probably a reality to that every one of us can relate to. We've all been through periods of our life where we've become distant in our relationship with God. Mm-hmm. We know his salvation, and we know that if we were to die today, we will go to be with him, for eternity. But as far as the intimacy, the connectedness of real, genuine fellowship and relationship, it can be very lacking, can't it, from time to time. We all know what that's about. But this is one of those interesting things. David makes this statement right at the get-go, "The Lord is my shepherd." And he's making the connection here that as a child of God, I have a personal connection to him that goes beyond anything that you could imagine. We think about the personal relationship that we have within the context of families. We certainly have the DNA connection, We have the genes, and we can even see it, because we look like our relatives, which may or may not be a good thing. But
There
it
we
doesn't
go.
necessarily follow that just because we have that genetic connection that there's a personal connection. Example, a father and a son have a very definite biological connection, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have a relational one. And even if one of those people wants to have a personal relationship, if the other one doesn't, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. The things are going to be distant. The same is true with our relationship with Jesus. He's the one who wants to have the relationship with us, but if we're pulling back, if we're distant, if we want to be distant or choose to be distant for whatever reason, there's going to be distance there. And as sad as that is as it relates to human relationships and even our relationship with God, it is a great comfort knowing, number one, that God is knowable, and number two, that he desires to have a personal, close walk with us. I mean, think about that for a minute. God can be personally known. As personal as knowing the person sitting next to you. God can be personally known. What is rather sad is how few of us have that kind of intimate relationship with him, frankly. Mm-hmm. And from what I can deduce from scriptures, David took advantage of that connection, that relationship. The more we've been going through the Psalms on Wednesday and sprinkling a few of them here on Sunday morning, man, I can just see it all over again. David he was right there. He just connected with God and told God how he was feeling, no matter how it was, what it was all about. And he was very honest and very genuine. And I mean, there was no facade, you know. It's pretty amazing. In fact, you know, this whole idea of knowing the Lord seems to be the hallmark of what it means to be a believer. Or not knowing the Lord is the hallmark of what it means to be an unbeliever. Let me show you a couple of passages. First, from Jeremiah chapter 9. Look at this. It says, "Let him who boasts boast in this, that he understands and knows me." What is God most concerned about as it relates to, you know, us and him? It's that we would have that personal knowledge, that personal relationship, to know the Lord, you know. Well, in the same way, you guys remember in the New Testament, from the words of Jesus himself, that those who will be gathered on his left on the day of judgment will be turned away with the words, "I never knew you." So once again, we come back to that idea of how important knowing the Lord is. Our God can be known. I'll say it again. In personal, joyful relationship. And I believe that it does cause great joy. I remember reading a story a number of years ago about a believer who was imprisoned for his beliefs and was thrust into a dark prison cell with no windows and no light coming in and no artificial light. He was literally cast into this cell, which was a place of total darkness. And he wrote how there were times during his incarceration where he had to get up and dance for joy because of the presence of the Lord. And that relationship with God was so tangible, so powerful, that in the midst of that darkness, he just had to get up and dance. And then that blows me away. But the beautiful, wonderful, personal aspect of knowing the Lord. You know, for many of us, our personal time with the Lord, we have to admit, is brief. And too often it's limited to those times in our lives when we're facing some kind of personal crisis, you know. Then we're all too ready to get personal with God. But when things are kind of, you know, going okay, we're on cruise, don't have any major pains to describe at that particular moment, we can get pretty distant, and we all have to admit that. The truth remains that God waits to be known. I love how the Apostle Paul says what he says to the Philippians and to us. Let me put this on the screen. From chapter 3, verse 10, he says, "I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings." You know, I hear this from a man who knew the Lord, I believe, so much more than I. You know, he tells in 2 Corinthians how he was taken up into a place of heaven and heard things that were, you know, unlawful for man to utter. And the knowledge and the revelation that this man was given by the Holy Spirit, apart from any human instruction. And yet the cry of his heart was, "I want to know Christ." It wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. He wanted a deeper, more intimate relationship with the Lord. You know, he wasn't ready to just sit back and say, "Wow, it's been good," you know. I want more. I want to know him in the power of his resurrection. He's like, you know what? I want to know him in the sharing of his sufferings. I want to even know him there. That's not necessarily a thing I'd put up on my fridge for a memory verse. I don't know about you, but that was where Paul's heart was. I want to know. I want to know. I want to have that personal walk with him. As we move on here now,
What the fuck?
in this short psalm, David makes a statement about God's ability to be a good shepherd when he says, "I shall not want." And I got to admit to you right now, this one always freaked me out as a kid. The 23rd Psalm made absolutely no sense to me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In my sort of, Americanized vernacular, that meant, the Lord is my shepherd, but I don't want him. And that's the way I kind of interpreted it until I understood that want was related to my needs, and that David was essentially saying, the Lord is my shepherd, therefore I shall have no need, or I shall not have any want of anything. But either way, even after we explain it, let's face it, it's a clumsy phrase. And it just doesn't work, frankly. It doesn't translate very well into our American vernacular. And I'll grant you it's poetic, but it's tough, I mean, to really kind of lay hold of it. I personally like better that the simple statement of the Lord is my shepherd, therefore all my needs are met. Because that's what David is saying. It may not be as poetic as the other, but what it lacks in poetry, it gains in accuracy. So we learn from verse 1 that not only can God be known personally, but that he's ready and willing to meet our needs on a personal level. So we learn a lot just from this very first verse. Jesus, our shepherd, cares for us, his sheep, in such a way as to meet our needs, and so forth. Let me show you another passage from Philippians, where Paul declares, my God will meet all your needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. I love that verse, but every so often I have to go back and look at it and see if it still says all. Because the enemy likes to come along and try to convince me that it no longer says all. And that there are some things that God just isn't going to do. For one reason or another. As far as meeting my needs. But you know what? We go back to the Word of God at a time like that and we bathe our heart in it, don't we? My God
How the fuck would they break my alliance with me?
all your needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. David carries the metaphor of the shepherd sheep further by saying in verse 2, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. And obviously this speaks of the Lord's ability to settle David's nerves, his heart, when it's aflutter. Like I said, I've never cared for not cared for, I don't mean it that way. I've never taken care of the four-legged variety of sheep. But I've read a little on it, and I understand that they can be very skittish animals from the standpoint of being easily spooked. By the way, that applies, all right? Just in case you were wondering. That's one of those areas where the connection is like real easy to make. But here's what I understand. When sheep are on edge, if they feel like there's some reason to be anxious, that they will not settle down, They will not become restful. They will just be very agitated and can't relax. And the job of the shepherd is to communicate something of, the fact that things are going to be okay, so that they can come to the place of relaxing and resting. And David says that the Lord does that for him. He does it for him. And I think all of us would agree that that's no small thing. Because we all know what it's like to be upset and agitated and nervous, anxious, to the point where we can't sleep at night, we can't eat, or we eat too much, depending on, your flavor. And, I think all of us would also agree that we differ in what is needed to kind of talk us down from the ledge. Some of us may be a little bit easier along those lines, but what we're learning from this is that our shepherd can calm our fears. He can do it. I want to show you a wonderful, wonderful statement made by Jesus in John.
I should have just killed him, because he's going to keep breaking me.
On chapter 14, on the screen, goes like this. Peace I leave you. My peace I give to you. And then he defines that, my peace. Not as the world gives, do I give you. And then he says this, let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. You know, I've talked with people who are going through very, very difficult circumstances, fearful circumstances, and I have discovered with many of them that they are walking in a kind of peace that is just unexplainable. I mean, their circumstances would suggest that they ought to be very upset and agitated, but when we sit down and talk, and I go there to, dope that I am, I'm going to go minister to this person, and they end up ministering to me, because there's this peace that has settled upon their hearts. And again, it's an unexplainable thing. Notice that Jesus said in that particular passage, I give you peace not as the world gives. See, the world gives peace based on circumstances, or maybe a bit of news that you got that might give you peace, or that results in peace, Good news from the doctor or something like that. Oh, finally I can rest, Well, that's circumstantial peace. Jesus gives a kind of peace that is not connected to the circumstances of our lives. It's just peace. And you don't know why you're feeling peaceful. You're sitting there kind of going, I know that I ought to be just kind of going out of my brain here, but I just have this sense of God's peace. And I hope you've experienced that. I've been able to experience it a couple of times in my life, and it's a delightful thing. You never like the circumstances that go along with it, but it is an amazing thing. But what's interesting about being anxious and being fearful, which I think every one of us can relate to, obviously on differing levels, but it is such a normal, natural response for you and I to become anxious and nervous when we get news that might lead us that direction or whatever, that we never really take the time to consider that what we're doing, which is giving into fear, is wrong. In other words, we think it's just kind of like apologizing for the color of my eyes. It's just me. I mean, this is just me, I mean, when I hear, bad news or whatever, I get really anxious. Have you ever heard somebody say, he's just kind of an anxious person, or they'll even say it about themselves. I've always kind of been a nervous person all my life, and it's kind of like, and they talk about it like it's their eye color. And it becomes normal to the point where we never stop to realize that maybe it's something that shouldn't be happening in our life. I got to tell you, there was a time in my life that was very revelatory. I mean, the Lord brought a powerful thing, a radical revelation into my heart and mind at one particular point that changed the way I saw fear. And he showed me, this is going to sound really elementary, but that's where I live. He showed me that my fearful attitude was missing the mark. Those of you that know the definition of sin, it is missing the mark. In other words, the Lord revealed to me that my fearful attitude was a sin. Isn't that crazy? Now, there's a lot of people that really tilt when you say something like that, because that's like saying to them, your blue eyes are a sin. To them, it's just normal. It's the way they are. But here's what the Lord revealed to me. Not only did he reveal that my fear was a sin, but that I could do something about it. I could confess it and bring it to the cross and find forgiveness. And then I would be ready and able to take the next step, which is to learn to trust and to say, Lord, you are my shepherd, and I'm going to trust you. So many times we get into a state of fearful anxiety, and we want to go to the Lord, and we want to find his peace, but we haven't dealt with the fact that our fearful attitude has actually missed the mark. As it relates to sin, we haven't brought our sin before the cross. People, can I gently tell you that sin still separates us from God? Not eternally. As a believer in Jesus, your sin can no longer separate you eternally from God, but it can separate you relationally. And relationship is kind of what David is talking about here. I've told you the example many, many, many times, that when I do something against my wife and say something that is hurtful or whatever, it's the same thing. There's a separation relationally. But it doesn't mean we're no longer married. It just means that there's a wedge. There's something between us. And I need to go to her then. And I need to confess it. And I need to ask her to forgive me. And then she extends forgiveness. And once that happens, there's a free flow of relationship once again between us. May I suggest to you that the same is true with your relationship with God? Sin still separates, right? It always has. It always will. It can't separate you any longer on an eternal scale because Jesus paid the eternal price of your sinning and mine as well. Praise the Lord. But relationally speaking, your sin can still put a distance between you and God. And if you're feeling that distance of relationship, there might be issues you need to deal with as it relates to sin. And that's why God brings conviction upon our hearts that we would deal with them and get that relationship settled. And there's such a sense of, oh, Lord, you know, when I come, there are periods of time in my life when I kind of forget to kind of come before the Lord and just say, forgive me. You know, Jesus told us to do that regularly in that thing we call the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our sins. We're supposed to make that a regular part of our prayer. Why? Because we need to get saved every day? Heavens, no. You're saved once and for all when you come to the cross and accept what Jesus did there. You come for forgiveness because you don't want that relationship to be hindered in any way. I don't want my prayers hindered. I don't want my heart hindered toward God. I don't want any of that to have any sort of a barrier, right? So I come to the Lord and say, forgive me for what I've done. That was wrong. Oh, and there's such a sense of release. And it's kind of like the connection is remade, you know. I didn't even notice the phone was off the hook to heaven, you know, sort of a thing. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, we're connected in that I can just feel the closeness resume. So when it comes to fear, it's important that we recognize that fear is missing the mark. We need to confess it, bring it to the cross, and then we can come to the Lord and allow him to give us that rest and peace that we are seeking, which culminates in what David says as he begins verse 3. Look at there in your Bible. He restores my soul. And that's the result. That's the result. My natural inclination, once again, is to become upset and anxious. I bring that to the cross. Father, forgive me for choosing fear over faith. Forgive me. Now, enable me to walk in the courage of faith, to trust in you, to rest in you, to know that you are my shepherd. And then what happens? The Lord responds to that prayer of faith, and he restores my soul. And our souls need to be restored, particularly during a time of anxiousness. Because remember, the soul is the seat of your emotions and your intellect. And isn't it those two things that become really agitated when you're fearful?
That
Your
would be
emotions obviously
awesome
become
if Red didn't have a... I wish I was there. It would have blocked him from being able to get the...
You're obviously afraid, but then your intellect, your thoughts just go bizarre. They just don't, yours too, I mean mine do, they just take on this bizarre sort of a worst case scenario, and I have these things going over in my mind, and I'm kind of like, ugh! I'm literally talking to myself and making myself crazy. And you guys don't look at me like you don't experience that too. You do, and you know you do, right? You know, we talked about that in the Psalms where David cried out to the Lord and said, how long, O Lord, must I take counsel in my soul? How long must I receive counsel from my soul? Because that's not the counsel I want. I want the counsel from you. My soul is just making me even more scared. My emotions, my intellect, and so forth. I think we obviously know how needful it is to be restored in our soul. David tells us in no uncertain terms, this is a birthright. of the children of God. Finishing verse 3, he goes on to say, he leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And this is just a simple way of saying he leads me in the right way. By the way, sheep are known for being very, very poor in the area of a sense of direction, and they're prone to wandering. Yeah, another one of those areas that just applies to us, right? I've got 2 granddaughters, and one of them one of them has an incredible sense of direction. She's the younger. I just gave it away, didn't I? And then the other one would get lost going to the bathroom and try to find her way back. So it's kind of funny. It's like, what goes into that, that one of them just kind of has this sense. Well, I think in a very real sort of a way, we all have a propensity to kind of lose our way. And we need the instruction of the Lord. We need the direction of the Lord. We need to be led by God, don't we? Right? I mean, often. And God promises that he'll do that for us. Let me show you a lovely promise in Psalms, a little bit later in the Psalms.
What the fuck?
Chapter 32, we're going to read this. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you.
What the fuck is
that's
this?
A glorious verse.
I was just trying to even out the bonuses there. And now he's making it so I fucking lose? What the fuck? What a piece of shit.
Wonderful verse. It's a wonderful promise from God's word. He says, I will instruct you and I will lead you. I'll take you, and lead you in the way that you're to go. And we kind of naturally like to take verses like this out of context and just kind of assume that there's this automatic sort of thing like, well, I'm a Christian, and so God's just going to, automatically lead me all the time in exactly the way I'm supposed to be going. However, you read the next verse and you find out that there is a responsibility on my part to accept that leadership and that guidance. Check this out. From the very next verse, it says, be not like a horse or a mule without understanding, which must be curbed with bit and bridle, or it will not stay near you. So you see, there's an interesting sort of a dynamic here. On the one hand, God promises he's going to lead and guide us. But on the other hand, we are told in no uncertain terms we need to be able to accept that leadership and that guidance and not be that horse that's always bucking and biting and nipping and kicking and wanting to get away from you and doesn't want to stand near you unless you actually, control him with a bit and bridle. God doesn't want our relationship with him to be based on a bit and bridle. He wants it to be based on a heart of love, where our response to his leading is, yes, Lord. Yes. I accept that. That's good. That's good. That's a good thing. Rather than our response of, well, I don't know. Let me think that one through a little while, God. Because I'm not always certain you have my best interests in mind. Yeah.
He is very slow.
Not the kind of relationship we want to have. Verse 4 goes on and says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Obviously, the rod and the staff were the tools of the shepherd to kind of direct the course of the life of the sheep. But I want you to notice here in verse 4 how the pronoun changes. Did you catch that? Earlier, David was talking about his shepherd. Now he's talking to his shepherd. And he goes from speaking about he to you. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. David speaks to his shepherd here with a declaration of faith to say, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. What is that? Well, anything in life that threatens our lives.
What?
Brings darkness, fear, and difficulty.
This guy
actually,
sucks.
in the Middle East, when shepherds were taking care of their flocks, they would
Bro, I can't believe that.
move them from pasture to pasture, and sometimes the moving of the flock would necessitate passing through a rocky area with canyon walls on the side that obscured the light of the sun. It was darker than it would be out in the open field, and there were also dangers that attended that sort of a thing.
Called
Rocky
me.
crags themselves presented dangers. Predators,
Frank?
animal predators could easily hide within those areas and prey upon the sheep. And dangers were aplenty. But David speaks to
Try
his
one more
shepherd,
time.
and he says,
He just called me. Would his phone die when he was trying to
even
call
when I'm
me?
going through that sort of a
Oh, there we
situation
go.
where
Now it's wrong. Now it's working.
it's dark,
What's up?
I know that there is danger very near. I know something else.
Are you in Butte?
You're with me.
Oh, what are you doing?
You're with me. You're with me in the midst of that.
All right. Sounds good. See you later. Doses.
David knew that it was his responsibility to stay close to the shepherd, especially close during those times of danger. If you're going through a time in your life that's trying and easily produces anxious thoughts, man, stay so close to your shepherd. Because dangers
Man, this guy
are
is
real.
bad.
And the enemy isn't going to look at your life and say, they're going through a hard spot right now. I'm going to kind of ease up a little bit. No, in fact, he's going to do the opposite. He will kick you when you're down. And we know that he roams around searching for those whom he may destroy or devour. So stay close to your shepherd. Don't wander off. Verse 3. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Now this is, again, one of those declarations of faith that David makes. He says, you prepare a table.
I did not think that Blue was going to be that type of person.
now.
That if I just tried to equalize the bonus. That sucks. That he would just rig the game against me. I shouldn't have done that. Well.
You and I may not understand what that means from the standpoint of hospitality, because for you and I, hospitality is different than the way they saw it in the Middle East. When you came under someone's roof, you came under their protection. When you joined them within the confines of their home, they would lay down their life for you. And it remains that way to this day. And it's a crazy sort of a thing. But he's using now this different kind of a metaphor. He leaves from the shepherd-sheep metaphor, and now he goes to the host-guest metaphor, saying, you prepare a table for me. Well, we don't realize it, but what he is saying is, you bring me under your protection, and you provide for me. Now notice how and where he does it.
Yeah, get up.
It's in the presence of
Game
his
hot.
enemies.
What the heck? Why do I keep getting
That's
kicked?
the point of what David is saying. It's within the presence of my enemies. In other words, in the full view
There's two.
of those who would want to take me down, including
I don't
the
even know if
enemy
I
of
want to
your
play
soul.
this since there's 2 bots in it, but I guess I will.
That the Lord prepares this place for you, this place of protection. And what happens there? He says, you anoint my head with oil. Again, that's not something you and I do. I don't think you probably have guests over and say, hey, welcome to our home, bend over, dump a bunch of oil on their head. But they did it back then, and that was a sign of being a very good host, frankly, because it was a refreshing. People would become very hot and so forth as they traveled from place to place. And so to refresh someone by pouring oil over their head was considered a very hospitable thing to do.
Okay, those are two bots, and they're
And then he goes on to say,
black
"My cup
doesn't move
overflows."
in. I'm
So I
gonna
sit
take
down at this table
North
that you
America. I'm
prepared
gonna
for me
take
in the presence of my enemy.
Australia
in the full
because
view of all those who wanna take
Australia
me
with this
down.
many bots
and
is
there
good.
is just this overflowing abundance to what you have given to me. It's just you pour yourself out and it just overflows. It's a beautiful picture of God's
But I think that
blessing
black
upon
goes
his
in.
children, what he desires to do, what he longs to do as we come under his protective covering. Finally, verse 6 says, "Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." And here is beautiful. David talks about his expectation of God's goodness today, and he also talks about his
Red's
full
not good.
expectation of God's goodness later.
So why would you
after
split like that?
This life is over. He says, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me." That's an interesting statement, isn't it? Goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. You know, it's interesting.
Yeah, I figured.
As I get older, it's gotten easier for me to look back and to see that God's goodness and mercy have followed me.
Okay, use that. Try to hit that purple.
As a young man, it was completely a declaration of faith, you know. I really hope God's goodness and mercy follows me. Well, now at almost 61 years of age, I can look back on my life and I can say, wow, God's goodness and mercy has followed me.
Not what
It
I
really
wanted.
has. And the older we get, the more we can look back and see that and say that and know that for the rest of my days, I believe that God's goodness and mercy will continue to follow me because I see that
Come
He has
on,
been
come on.
faithful.
Yeah!
And then as we look ahead beyond this life, notice that David expresses his assurance. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Boy, that's what I want. That's what I want for myself. It's what I want for you. Confidence for today, assurance for tomorrow. Isn't that what you want too? Let's be confident of the Lord's goodness for today and assured of his faithfulness and blessing and abundant provision for tomorrow as well.
Nice. I do want to see what this is.
3, 2, 1.
The New York Times
Addressing
calls
the
the holdovers
drama.
laugh out
It's a
loud funny.
cult.
There's been a certain tension floating across our comment section, and it's even went on to impact other Christian creators in the space. And I think it's time that we address this. Since the beginning of this channel, we've existed to encourage, empower, and inspire people to live a life that blesses God. But sometimes that hasn't always been clear, and why we do some of the things we do on this
Weird
channel
play.
is also not clear. And I'm not saying that we're perfect or that you have to agree. I mean, ultimately, I want to hear from you guys, but I want to make sure that we address the elephant in the room. And I also want to make sure you're subscribed if you're not, because we just passed 500,000 subscribers, and a huge percentage of you guys still aren't subscribed. So I want to get into this mindset. I want to get into the reality that so many people are activating their faith in a way that I think isn't just counterintuitive to their own flourishing, but contradictory to Scripture. So this mindset is in multiple camps. Again, I'm not talking about just fundamentalist Baptists. I'm not talking about just fundamentalist Seventh-day Adventists. This is everywhere. It can get very cultish, and it's usually anchored on, look at how much we abstain. If you don't abstain as much as we abstain, you're bad, you're evil, you're worldly, and you're not a real Christian. So I'm walking you guys through this so that you guys can critically do the thinking for yourselves, right? So you guys can examine and see, I've heard this song before. I've heard this before. I understand. I get it. This idea that in your pursuit of sanctification, you got to check out from the world. You got to check your brain out. You can't pay attention to anything that's going on because they're trying to trick you. They're trying to get you. Is again in contrast with the ministry of Paul. Paul writes that he became all things to all people so that by all possible means he may save some. That's in 1 Corinthians. This is demonstrated in the way Paul handles himself in Acts chapter 17. We're going to look at Acts 17 and 18 because there's two things that are important here. I think they tie into each other. So Paul is here, and he's in Athens, and he is interacting with the Greeks in Athens. When Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in a synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked,
I don't
"What
know
is this
why he
God
hasn't
trying to
taken it
say?"
yet. He should have
Others
just
remarked,
taken it by
"He
now.
seems to be advocating for foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Verse 19. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." So Paul's preaching the gospel. They're Greeks.
I do not like this game.
Foreign gods. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. So there's certain people that just want to talk about the latest ideas, the latest doctrines.
Should I just wipe out?
Want to go from diet fad to diet fad, and they never want to actually just stick to anything. They jump from different ideologies. They don't want to actually live out anything, right? This is what they did. Whatever the latest idea was, this is what they were on. So check this out. So listen.
No.
So listen what happens with Paul here. This is fascinating. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." So Paul is around a bunch of pagans. He's around a bunch of pagans who all they do is sit around and talk about the latest ideas and the latest religions.
I have like the worst cards too. That sucks.
That's what they do. And to have their bases covered, they put up an idol with an altar, and the inscription reads, "To an unknown God." Paul uses their own idol to communicate the gospel to them. Are you guys tracking with me? Paul uses an idol of the people that they worshiped, a false idol that is not a true God. And he takes that idol and he uses the thing that's familiar to them, and he says, "This is what I'm going to proclaim to you today." When
you shop on Amazon.com, there's a good chance you're buying from an independent seller like Adrienne. When Adrienne launched Blue Henry cocktail garnishes, she was up to her neck in orders. She needed to expand.
It's like, there's nowhere else, Adrian.
She got a loan from Amazon.
you see myself and other creators on YouTube using the idols of this world and then proclaiming who Jesus is in the gospel, this is where what I've always gleaned this from. So when you see me pulling in whatever just happened with Aiden Ross, an idol, and Playboy Cardi, an idol, to people, I'm using the idols of this world to pull people in and then proclaim the gospel to them, as Paul did. I didn't make this up. This is what Paul did, which, by the way, this is what the early church did. The moment the early church could meet in buildings, they did meet in buildings. And you know what? Some of those buildings were old pagan buildings that they converted into churches. This leveraging of what's already here to communicate the gospel, whether it's buying a building or whether it's using ideas, has been throughout all of church history, and it's right here in Acts chapter 17. Because
I hope he gets
the
smoked.
people that actually walked with Jesus himself, didn't live in this false dichotomy world where you had secular and sacred, and these lines couldn't cross, and right? That didn't exist. And so whenever I've made music, I've always seen my music as this. So Paul is using an idol, their own idol, to proclaim the good news to them. But it gets deeper than that. Check this out. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their land. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. Now watch this. For in him we live and move and have our being. Have some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Do you guys know what Paul is doing there? I'll give you a hint. He does it all throughout the book of 1 Corinthians. You guys know what Paul's doing here? Not only is Paul using an object of their worship, a false idol, and flipping it and telling them about Jesus with it, Paul is quoting their own pagan philosophers and poets to them. And it says this in the scriptures. Okay, I don't understand how anyone looks at this passage and then goes, we should be afraid of the world. We shouldn't read books from secular authors. We shouldn't keep up with what's going on. Paul is demonstrating this in the...
I do think that you should do that, but you should be wary about these people and understand that they are not from, like, of God.
way he's sharing the gospel. Verse 28, for in him we live and move and have our being. That is not a Bible verse. It's in the Bible, but it's not an original thought.
Yes.
That's not an Old Testament prophet. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. That is not a Bible verse. It's in the Bible.
Ooh.
But that's not... He's
I
not
can get a
quoting the
red
prophet.
kill
He's not
here.
quoting the Old Testament. He's
Oh,
quoting
maybe
their
not.
own secular poets. As some of your own poets have said. This is the equivalent of quoting, I don't know, Bob Marley, quoting the Beatles, quoting Kanye, quoting Drake, and saying, yeah, you know, when you heard this idol of yours, Drake, say this, I'm going to take that and I'm going to flip it and I'm going to say God's plan, but you know what? He's missing Jesus, but I'm going to proclaim Jesus with you by using God. That's what Paul is doing here. He's quoting the poets of their era, of their relevancy, of the things that are relevant to them.
Went the wrong
that they
way
can relate
for
to.
me.
And all of 1 Corinthians is like this. Food for stomach, stomach for food. That's their quote. Bad company corrupts good character. That's their quote. Everything is permissible for me. That's their quote. So the fact that someone can read Acts 17, read 1 Corinthians, and not understand that Paul is repeatedly using the very idols and their poets and their scholars and taking them and leveraging them to communicate the gospel is just I don't know what that is. That's like a fundamentalist ignorance of what this even is, like what these scriptures are. He's not making this up, right? And then he goes on. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone.
Does he smack?
Now he's gently rebuking them.
What is he doing?
Correcting them. By the way, the God, he's not like these idols you've made. He's not gold and silver and stone, made by human hands and design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. He's talking about Jesus. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysus, a member of the Areopagus. So one of the actual members of the Areopagus ends up following Paul after this. Also, a woman named Demarius and a number of others. Paul used the idols that they worshiped and quoted their own poets to them. And it worked. And some people got saved. Some people from this council got saved. So this idea that you need to check yourself out of the world, you need to stop reading, you need to stop thinking, you need to stop studying, you need to stop keeping up with the zeitgeist of what's happening today.
Did the exact opposite of what I wanted.
With what's happening in the Overton window, what's happening in politics, what's happening in culture and podcasting. This is a nonsensical, I would say, anti-biblical position. It's not in Scripture. It's not how Jesus did ministry. It's not how the early church fathers did ministry. It's not effective, and it's just, what are we talking about? So that is the reason why we react to different trending events, cultural moments, other podcasters, other creators. But that's not all we do here. We actually did an entire series that has nothing to do with anything trending or anything current that helps you discover what is your purpose right now. So if you want to check out that entire playlist, put that over here for you, all right? I'll see you over there. Peace.
All right. Let's go home.
User adaption, so smooth. You have magical powers?
محمد اخوه فيقه لا ما شفتوش اشوفه والله اطلع انت روح شوف وجهه خد جوا غاد شوف توقع
I'm still. I can't. No, I can't. That sucks that I can't. Even if I use this and get 4. If I had a 10 trade, I definitely could kill red. I mean, not red, black. I gotta go. Oop. Let's see what my... still a shit trade. That sucks. The banning of Nick Fuentes. I want to see what this. I want to see this.
How about another joke, Ray? No, I think we've had enough of your jokes. What do you get? I don't think so. When you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash, I'll tell you what you call the police. Get what you
fucking deserve.
Let's flip it and go.
Oh man, this is what real American patriots look like.
Yeah.
This is America unchained.
Yeah. Why has that guy got black fucking fingernails? What a fucking faggot, bro. Look at him. Guy looks like a fucking faggot.
We got the whole posse.
We got the whole posse.
Nick.
What the fuck?
The documentary that we're about to watch explores the hot button issues of transgenderism.
What somebody else's truth is might not be my truth.
What somebody else's truth is. Shut the fuck up.
Last year, in one of his live streams, Nick Fuentes made an appeal to his audience with regards to public appearances. While he insisted that he personally isn't put off by unattractive people, he recognizes that politics is a vicious game, and appearances are everything. The Groyper image needs to be carefully managed, and when there are cameras around, Nick can only be seen with people who can't be ridiculed for the way they look. Or, in his words,
Please, if you are fat or ugly, just stay away from the photographs. And generally, just stay away. It's not personal.
Honestly, that's kind of based.
I'm not that shallow. It's not that. It's just that if we ever have a picture of the Groypers, and it's a bunch of fat, ugly retards.
It's a bunch of fat, ugly retards.
Fat, ugly retards. People are going to say, oh, look, here come the Groypers, and they're going to post a picture of your fat, ugly face.
I agree.
You heard the man, audience of people who willingly self-identify as anonymous green blobs on the internet. Don't spoil this man's image in public by being unattractive. From then on, Fuentes would only ever be seen with the physical elites of America First. The pinnacles of traditional masculinity. This fucking
that guy's
guy.
not that.
Oh,
like
God.
that guy just looks like a normal dude.
By the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, Nick and his little scamps decided to show up anyway. He was very quickly ejected from the building and then went on to hold an America First conference across the road, where he complained about the gross injustice of being kicked out of a private event that he wasn't invited to. He had also just been permanently banned from Twitter, a decision that he seems very confused by.
You know, it's so weird. I tell people I get banned from Twitter and they say, why? They give you a reason? It's like, you know, they banned the sitting president of the United States from Twitter. They don't give you a reason. It's not like they have a good reason.
2 minutes later.
How many of you have seen a tweet that I put on Twitter and then I delete like 30 minutes later? Have you ever seen that? I think like one time I tweeted, I said, I wish George Floyd would get exploded with a grenade. I said, I wish there was a zombie apocalypse so we could kill George Floyd 2 times.
That's a funny joke, bro.
Well, that's definitely against the terms of service, I think.
But there was one thing he said at the event which was correct. The event he was ejected from was called Uncancelled and advertised as a response to big tech censorship. Fuentes correctly pointed out that none of the speakers at CPAC had actually been banned from any major platform.
Yeah.
The one exception being Donald Trump. So at the very least, he's aware of the incredibly obvious fact that conservatives who go on international media circuits to complain about being silenced are not actually being silenced. Fuentes, on the other hand, is now banned from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, PayPal, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Airbnb, Southwest Airlines, TikTok, Reddit, Patreon, Coinbase, Discord, Streamlabs, DLive, Email Octopus, and Delta Airlines. So if anyone's being censored, it's this guy. He's a bit like Rosa Parks, really. If Rosa Parks ate her own snot and commanded an army of dribbling bedwetters who still need a note to get out of gym class, of course. Some people have said he's also on a no-fly list, which would imply that he's currently on the federal government's terrorist screening center. Of course, this is just a rumor, for which the only proof he's given is a video interaction where he asks a Southwest representative if he's on a no-fly list, to which she says, "I'm not sure," which isn't proof, believe it or not. A much more
Well, they didn't allow him to fly, so...
more plausible explanation would be that he was banned from a specific airline for unruly behavior. And I say this is more likely because he admitted it.
I think I'm about to get kicked off my flight to PA because my mask isn't covering my nose.
Why does he make it?
Yup, just got kicked off. Here's the best. I never refused to wear the mask, but the flight attendant had the plane go back to the gate and had me removed because of my attitude. Power trip! Exclamation point. I got up and looked him in the eyes and said, "Hey, f*** you." He replies, "Enjoy your time in Chicago." I said, "Yeah, eat shit."
I like how they made him sound like a woman. Like, what the fuck?
Hi.
That's definitely not
I'm
how
Brett
it went.
West from the creator of Disney's Gargoyles.
He wasn't whining about it.
I can see why the no-fly list line was a bit more appealing. Unfortunately, getting kicked off of a flight for throwing your toys out of the pram isn't really going to give you the same political martyrdom as being suspected of domestic terrorism. However, Fuentes was labeled as a white supremacist podcaster by the FBI, who currently may or may not be investigating him over a $250,000 Bitcoin donation that was made to him ahead of the Capitol Hill riots. But in his conference where he complained about being censored, he also argued that being censored was really the best thing for him, because now he can say whatever he wants. The problem is, the only threshold left for Fuentes to cross is one that would lead to criminal charges, and he's already been dancing pretty close to that line. A typical Nick Fuentes maybe doing a crime clip consists of 3 steps. 1. Say some dumb shit that could potentially be illegal. 2. Realize that what you're saying could be illegal, often whilst you're saying it. And 3. Say the opposite of what you said at step 1. Let's look at some examples.
Why? Because we had no leverage. What are we going to do? What can you and I do to a state legislature besides kill them? Although we should not do that. I'm not advising that, but I mean, what else can you do, right?
So that was filmed a couple of days
Yeah, that's
before
not that.
Capitol Hill
What the
riot,
fuck?
where he
Well,
was
I've heard
referring to
people
the
say
state
that shit all the
legislators
time.
who were refusing to overturn the 2020 election.
I've
One
heard
of those
people say
legislators
shit
was
like
Mike
that all the
Pence, who
time.
The Capitol Hill rioters were
I don't
calling
think
to
that that
hack.
should be
And
illegal
then
for
we
you
can
to
look at
say
what
shit
he's
like that. It's dumb that it is illegal for you to say
said to
stuff
his
like that.
followers who entered the Capitol building on January 6th.
George Groipington says, good to see you back up and running. Nick, keep on keeping on. Also to the audience, if you have your phone on you inside the Capitol, destroy it or get rid of it. Feds are using the data. I think it would be too late, honestly. They probably have it all. But as a precaution,
piece of shit.
probably destroy your phone, your SIM card, all that information. I mean, I don't know. Is that legal to say? Maybe don't do that. Actually, can I say that? Don't destroy evidence. Don't destroy. I don't know. Is that a crime to say?
I feel like what's happening here is obvious that I shouldn't need to explain it, but given the demographic we're trying to reach, here it is. In the US, they have something called the Brandenburg test, which is used to determine whether or not inflammatory speech is being used to advocate for illegal action. In both of those clips, Fuentes does end by advising his followers against illegal action, but the Brandenburg test doesn't require the incitement to be an explicit statement. The two elements that do need to be met are 1, the speech is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action, and 2, the speech is likely to incite or produce such action. So, if you tell people who entered the Capitol to destroy their phones, then walk back on it when you've realized that what you're saying might be illegal, what kind of action is your speech directed to incite? Because you have told people that it's in their interest to destroy their phones, but just that it's not in your interest to tell them that. This technique is essential to the way Fuentes makes his points. Everything he says is just a meme and also deadly serious at the same time. Take the infamous Cookie Monster question, which Fuentes uses as an analogy for Holocaust denial.
The math doesn't seem to add up there. The math doesn't quite seem to add up there. I don't think you'd result in 6 million, maybe 200 to 300,000 cookies. And I think the Red Cookie Association said something like that, probably 200 to 300,000 cookies baked. Probably. And in addition, you know, in this hypothetical, I imagine that if you took aerial photographs over the kitchens, you would need to see certain smokestacks to release the smoke from baking the cookies. And the smokestacks would project certain shadows, but I guess they're not visible in the aerial photographs taken over the kitchens. Moreover, if you look at the soil texture, it's really not deep enough for mass cookie storage underground. And so there's a lot of things, you know, in the cookie kitchen, they say that the ovens are wooden and they have windows on them and they're not totally secure. And the ovens that they use, they actually did sort of an ad hoc use of that particular kind of oven, even though they made a perfectly good design for ovens for a different purpose, for delousing.
He dragged this out for a very long time, but you get the idea. Now, he's always insisted that this was just a joke and that he's not really a denier, but with just a bit of pushing, he'll end up saying things like this.
So, I think there's a lot of stuff that's clearly like, atrocity propaganda. You see this in any war, in any time, there's atrocity propaganda where they try and really make it heavy-handed to guilt people and to, bring down the hammer on the, transgressing country. But obviously I'm against, genocide or human experimentation. I mean, I'm against things that are evil, but I like every Holocaust survivor said that they were experimented on by Mengele. Like every single one, the Nazi doctor. And it's like, definitely he existed and definitely did terrible things, but not every one of them saw that guy. Like, clearly there's some fibbing going on. So
now,
I do agree with that.
I don't know who needs to hear this, but saying the Holocaust happened and then following up with a rapid fire of claims accusing Jewish people of exaggerating what happened to them to meet a political goal is Holocaust denial. Like, it's literally in the definition.
But is it Holocaust denial?
That every single Holocaust survivor claimed to have been experimented on by Joseph Mengele, then you're kind of definitely calling almost every single Holocaust survivor a liar. But who am I trying to convince here? These people weren't reeled into this movement because some bogey-eating shitbag said that some niche aspects of the Holocaust sounded silly to him. They don't care about facts. What they really care about, above everything else, is community. And nothing says it more than the inane grinning of people who are finally getting to feel as if they're part of something for the first time in their life. Yes, it's easy to poke fun at people who look like they still need to hide their lunch money in a secret stash. There's a stark resemblance to the old 4chan meetups where the edgiest, most controversial shitslingers on the internet turned out to be exactly the kind of mediocre slobs everyone expected them to be. But the thing is, there's nothing wrong with looking like this. I mean, the pit vipers are not really my thing, but looking like this doesn't make you any less of a man in my eyes. Which is weird because it absolutely does to them. There's a moment in the CPAC
What do you mean
building where
looking
these
like
guys
that?
Notice a left-wing journalist and decide to gripe him.
I'm the Goiper. Hey, is that Zach Patrizzo? This guy from Salon, far left, progressive publication, is allowed at CPAC, but not Nick Fuentes? But America First conservatives like Nick Fuentes are not. Come back here, we're not finished. Why does your voice sound like that? Why does your voice sound like that? Why are you so squeaky? Because you told your supporters. Sword.
Really? These people are making fun of someone else for having a voice break? These people are berating someone else's masculinity? But really, it makes perfect sense. Often, this is just what happens when victims of bullying find themselves in a position of power over someone, especially someone who reminds them of everything they hate about themselves. Because whether it's Hitler getting rejected from art school, the leader of the 9/11 attacks getting surpassed by his 2 elder sisters, the Oklahoma bomber being rejected by the special forces, or even our own Nick Fuentes, who allegedly shot himself running the mile in high school, the backstory for all of these people is one of emasculation and humiliation. There's a very popular YouTube video called What Pretending to Be Crazy Looks Like, which features the Parkland school shooter trying to feign insanity during his interrogation. The act is extremely weak, but there is one place where Cruz slips up that might not be completely obvious. One of the key indicators of homicidal insanity is a lack of motive, and here, Cruz seems to compromise himself without even noticing. At one point, he tells the interrogator about how he had a fight with one of his classmates over a girl and lost. And that's it. That was all they needed to start establishing a motive. Now, I don't think any of these wallopers are going to end up killing anyone. Well, maybe you will, Timothy. I see you there. You
Is that
ravenous
kid's name?
testosteroid. We all know your mother.
That kid's obviously like in high school, bro.
This event, but that doesn't mean you can't still be a badass motherfucker. This is really f***ing weird. Why is this guy here? He should be at school, learning how to use the urinals without pulling his trousers all the way down. Pal! Mate! This will never end well for you. I know the whole white supremacist journey always starts with some kind of trauma or humiliation, and of course you're going to fall into a movement that promises to reclaim Western civilization or reclaim your masculinity or make America great again. It must be really cathartic to huddle around this guy and finally be the one doing the bullying, to finally let someone else feel your pain and all that Mickey Mouse bullshit.
I like how he's just assuming that this is what this is. Or maybe it's that fucking journalist is a piece of shit.
But you and Fuentes don't have the same interests. This is his job, and he's going to be doing this until he either ends up in jail or just fades into irrelevance like all the other ones did. I mean, he could become president one day, sure, but who knows? But unless that happens, everyone else here is just kind of slowly ruining their lives. It's okay for Fuentes to be seen on camera doing this, but for everyone else, this could f*** their chances at college, it could f*** their future relationships, it could f*** their job prospects, and Fuentes doesn't care. He knows a lot of the kids in his movement will grow out of it, but it doesn't matter because he'll just find new people. And all the radioactive levels of cringe shouldn't distract anyone from the fact that these are literal children who are being ideologically groomed by a hate group. And if you're one of those people who have gone through life feeling rejected or lonely or unfulfilled, it's worth knowing that you were targeted for that. People
I'm pretty sure that most leftists are the ones who felt rejected. Like there's actually studies done that say that people who are on the left are the ones who feel that way, not people on the fucking right.
Things that they don't have. When a movement is selling an image of exceptionalism,
He was probably rejected in high school and all sorts of shit.
Is to attract patrons.
I mean, he
who
looks
are
like an ugly
unexceptional
motherfucker.
and weak. According to the research, whether it's the old skinheads or the suited up dweebs of the alt-right, people who leave these groups always say that they started questioning the movement long before they made the exit. The main thing that held them back was the fear that they would have nowhere else to go. Many of them are led to believe that society will never forgive them. And unfortunately, there might be a few too many people on my side of the aisle making sure that that feeling is justified. And I'm not saying anyone has to welcome a bunch of bi-curious fascists into their life, but it should be worth
Bi-curious.
understanding that there's a difference between people who can be changed and people like Fuentes who will probably be doing this for the rest of their lives. There's a documentary called Healing from Hate that really helps with understanding these movements as well as how to get out. And I know you gripers all have access to your mother's Amazon Prime accounts, so you should take a look. If for nothing else than for a change of scenery from that stupid green screen background. Or, if you want, you can just carry on thinking that this is what saving America looks like and that these are the kinds of people who built ancient Rome. And in that case,
I like how he just shows a bunch of dudes, like normal looking dudes, and he's acting like they look terrible. Like they all just look like normal dudes. What do you mean?
Leave you and the
They all just look like normal looking kids.
Antifa guys.
Like
to
you look
figure
more
out
ugly
most
than
of
these people. Like a lot more
Yes.
ugly.
And until then, let's flip and go.
Oh my goodness, after he took off the shades too, he even looks worse.
Bipolar 1, I got help to push back.
I got help to push back.
We got help to push back with Lybalvi.
Once daily prescription Lybalvi is proven to treat manic or mixed episodes of bipolar 1 in adults to help you push back. Elderly patients with dementia have an increased risk of death or stroke. Do not take Lybalvi if you are taking opioids or are in opioid withdrawal. The samidorphan in Lybalvi can cause severe opioid withdrawal that can lead to hospitalization or increased risk of life-threatening.
What makes us postmodern are our psychologies.
I don't like this guy's voice. Bro, this sucks. Cards are just fucking me right now. No, Jesus was not a communist. You dumb shit. This is everything. Have I been attacked by a bioweapon?
Beloved, welcome back to the shop. Goodness, I've had one foot in the grave, going on week 4 right now. I have been stricken with the worst man flu, or whatever you want to call it. Some sort of a bioweapon, probably from our filthy government, but they can't keep God's people down. But I've been on light duty, man. So we're back out at the shop today. We're going to tackle something that I've been putting off for some time.
Someone needs to do something about black, and it's not me.
And that is this. Do you have a junk drawer? A place where everything goes to die that you don't want to deal with, and then it compounds and compounds? Well, I've got a huge one over here, and we're going to tackle that today. This will kind of be building on what I can do now and going over the shop series on how to lay out shops and how to organize things. And boy, the urgency has come upon me when I think about all of the messes and chaos that I would leave my children as I am laid low. I don't want to be that guy. My dad, bless him, he did not see to his affairs and left us with a lot of stuff to deal with. So out of love to my family, if I'm not long for this world, I would like to get things sorted out. So we're going to go over that today, and it might be a fun project. And let's dig in, and we'll just deal with everything the best we can. Before we get too carried away, let's get the fire going. I'm trying to keep it warm in here. That cold air puts me into a coughing fit that drops me to my knees. I know, we've all got our own problems, don't we? How you doing, Mama? You staying warm today? All right. Let's tear into it. You doing okay, Mama?
Huh?
Yesterday, I started a pretty ambitious project. I bought this. This is a Husky 300 two-stroke dirt bike. I bought this brand new in 2017. It's a TE 300. It's the last of the carbureted bikes. And usually you don't keep dirt bikes very long. I've got over 800 hours on this, but I just like it so much. I've got it set up, and I just have always enjoyed it. It's been the best bike I ever had, and I keep considering, selling it and getting a newer one and upgrading to the new technology. But the more I look at them, the more I'm less inclined to get one. A lot of, they burn more fuel. They don't have a kickstart. The fuel injection, it's got all sorts of computers, and they're just so much more complicated that I decided, well, yesterday, rather than do that, I'll just take half the money of what it would cost to buy a brand new one. Well, a lot less, because once you buy one, it doesn't stop with that. You got to, of course,
Ooh, I need to take a piss.
Every bread tuber and lefty tuber makes a pipeline video. You know what I'm talking about, right? Where they put out some video about how in 2014 they were part of Gamergate, in 2016 they watched Sargon, and they were becoming a member of the alt-right. But somehow they were pulled out of the pipeline. They were saved. They often begin such a video by decrying the competitive nature of video games, or the love of edgy humor within gaming culture, because competition is anti-equality and edgy humor is anti-safe space, making gaming on some level fundamentally anti-leftist. This is something I touched on in the last video. And they haven't stopped making these videos. It seems like every week there's a new crumb tuber out there who's posting on Twitter how they're making an alt-right pipeline radicalization video, and how much it would help them if people posted their own pipeline stories and spread it around. The stories themselves are almost always the same kind of thing. These people grew up as a normie, believing in the normie liberal ideal as much as your average unengaged, politically unaligned person did 10 or 20 years ago. They viewed the broader left as liberation central, while it was right-wing religious types who wanted to restrict freedom of speech. So, when the fringes of the left began to radicalize, and subsequently were featured on screaming feminist SJW-owned compilations on YouTube, which was quite an edgy platform back in the day, the normies watched those videos and laughed. They were still committed to those values of free speech and openness, and it was novel to them that leftoids, rather than rightoids for once, were opposing those values. After that,
how is Green have more people than me still?
Why the champions of free speech and openness
I'm
were
confused.
suddenly betraying those values. These were the Sargons and the Paul Joseph Watsons. Beyond them, there were the conservatives, who were more than willing to take this new political shift and provide answers through their own lens. The Milo Yiannopoulos and Ben Shapiro's. You should notice that I am literally describing the leftist conception of the alt-right pipeline, and that's because on some level, yeah, it's true. However, the left gets a lot wrong about it. Firstly, if the end of the pipeline is the alt-right, then it obviously doesn't end at Milo and Ben Shapiro. A white nationalist, quasi-neo-fascist movement has no interest in gay or Jewish men. I can't believe that needs to be said, but here we are. The pipeline to the extreme end of the right goes far beyond these two, but leftoids like to pretend that they're the end of the pipeline.
Boom! Yes!
Center-right, mainstream right, and far-right all into the same group. Ignore all of their differences and act like your average person
Someone
is
did
just as bad as
something.
the most radicalized rightoid, even though, of course, these same people will go to painstaking lengths to define minute differences between different flavors of leftist, and say that the center-left sock dems are fundamentally different from the far-left socialists. Secondly, their pipeline theory extends far beyond Gamergate to fascist, or 4chan to neo-Nazi pipelines, and those ones are already ridiculously stupid. If you think that Nazis like edgy, irreverent jokes, tell a deformed dick one-ball Hitler joke in front of them and see how much they laugh. But it's not just that. Have you ever heard of the country singer to alt-right pipeline? I know I haven't. How about the divorced dad to alt-right pipeline? Joe Rogan to alt-right pipeline? Russell Brand to alt-right pipeline? PewDiePie to alt-right pipeline? Is this just smaller pipelines branching off of the greater people who disagree with me to alt-right pipeline? Hey, how about the private school to alt-right pipeline, guys? If you're not being told directly by the government what to do, you're apparently a Nazi, which is the complete opposite in reality. After Trump's victory in 2016, the media, in a desperate attempt to figure out what went wrong, latched onto the alt-right pipeline narrative too. And even though Biden took the White House and Trumpism was dealt a public embarrassing blow during the January 6th Capitol riot, the media continues to lean on the pipeline thing. Studies were commissioned on the nature of the pipeline, like the embarrassingly inaccurate Evaluating the Scale, Growth, and Origins of Right-Wing Echo Chambers on YouTube, which labeled Shoe on Head as right-wing. But this is full of goodies. There's apparently a guy under far left called Cuck Philosophy. Oh, Hugo and Jake is in here too. You're misgendering now, dude. Maddox and Bunty King are put under centrist, even though those guys have swung quite far left in recent years. The far-right category, along with Shoe, also contains It's a Gundam, Sargon, Academic Agent, Armored Skeptic, Repzian, Matt Jarbo, Garapi, Joe Rogan, Dankula, the list goes on. What they call far-right contains a wide variety of different people who are not at all politically aligned. It's more like when they say left, they mean establishment, and when they say right, they mean out.
Beautiful!
And yes, I'm in there too. I'm sure Academic Agent and I see eye to eye on Tomboy Abs. There was also the infamous Alternative Influence, broadcasting the reactionary right on YouTube, detailing how political YouTubers adopt the platform, look, and tactics of non-political YouTubers in an effort to radicalize people rightward, in their view, anyway.
See, this is what's kind of fucked about the fixed risk, is that basically you win if you just don't attack people. Try to be as good, like, as passive as possible, and then you'll win. Which kind of sucks, because I like to keep moving, but I want to become a
decries a segment of
grandmaster
YouTube that
at
has
a
wildly different political beliefs, only similar to each
classic
other in that they are
at
anti-leftist,
fixed
ranging
first.
from conservatives, libertarians, to monarchists, to white nationalists, and that these creators form a broader community created by an interconnected web of appearances on each other's channels, sometimes as guests, but other times as debate opponents. The implication being that this web of connections creates a pipeline for viewers to be pushed down, even though in actuality, the people in this community disagree with each other regularly. They're just not explicitly leftist. And the people who wrote this report view politics as being made up of my specific brand of leftism versus everybody else. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, the implication surrounding the alt-right pipeline discourse is that radicalization is bad. Fair enough. But there's obviously other pipelines that radicalize people leftward. In fact, in People's I Was Saved from the Alt-Right pipeline stories, they almost always describe the exact same alt-left pipeline. People start off watching iDubbbz or Chris Ray Gun. They end up watching Shoe on Head or ContraPoints. And then eventually they get to Vosh or the Serfs. There absolutely is a pipeline leading from milquetoast progressive to tanky in denial. Yes, I know Vosh calls himself a libsock and places himself in opposition to overt tankies, but as we've gone over in previous videos, that's a smokescreen and everybody knows it. Now, if you were to approach leftists with this obvious double standard, you'd get one of two replies. The first
What is he
just blanket
doing?
denial. The second is far more interesting, that radicalization leftward is good and radicalization rightward is bad. Again, if you look at any lefty Twitter spaces, you'll see people talking casually about how pulling others leftward is a victory. They're not interested in you as individuals, but only as fertile ground to colonize for their ideology. They say nothing about changing people's habits, or their inclinations towards harassment or violence, only that they're now playing for the correct political team. This attitude, in fact, makes them more likely to be harassing or violent, because now they have moral righteousness on their side. I used to be part of the bad team, but now I'm part of the good team. So if I do all that bad shit I used to do, but while waving the good flag and towards people waving the bad flag, then it's good. How very Marcusean of you. This is why a common leftist mantra is, let this radicalize you rather than leading you to despair. And why a common conversation is discussing what radicalized you, or what caused you to wake up.
He should have
Again,
went
using
boom boom and then put up
awakening
there.
language we've talked about before. These radicalized people
But he's
use
kinda
all of
sucks.
the tools of previous repressive regimes. The big lie is now my truth. Anecdotes are now lived experience. Rejecting political neutrality in the marketplace of ideas has become
Yeah, he
cancel culture,
sucks.
which
Bad.
they then further cloak by calling it accountability because they've lost the optics war on canceling. Bootlicking pride in the ideology is now called virtue signaling. It's the same mechanisms retooled for the modern age. As it turns out, the concept of a pipeline funneling people away from the left is also something that has been rebranded and retooled for leftist purposes. It was once called the Walk Away Movement, otherwise known as How I Left the Left. In 2018, Brandon Straka, a gay Democrat, started the movement and tried to encourage disaffected liberals to leave the Democratic Party and vote for Trump-leaning Republicans. And, to the credit of people who actually view this as a radicalization effort, Straka was later arrested and convicted for his part in the January 6th Capitol riots. The walkaway movement did certainly appeal to people on the center-left, who found themselves slowly migrating rightward, as they felt that the left had abandoned them and their interests. For example, Ariel Scarcella, a prominent lesbian activist, has recently swung rightward as the left has largely abandoned lesbian activism in favor of trans activism in the past decade. And other people, for example, like Judith Rose, did legitimately fall down a QAnon rabbit hole after leaving the left. But despite all of this, the walkaway movement did actually speak to another segment of the population. People who were legitimately still aligned with leftist social issues, but felt that on other topics, the left was absolutely going too far, whether that be economically in their swing towards overt socialism, or culturally in their attempts to demonize and censor everybody who refused to march in lockstep with them. It wasn't just all hidden rightoids, it absolutely was abandoned leftoids too. And then you begin to notice some other subtle things. It's not just that some people go PewDiePie to Ben Shapiro to Richard Spencer, it's that some people go CRG to Shoe to Vosh. Where leftoids might ask what radicalized you, rightoids might ask what was your
Who's CRG?
Another of those academic papers on the alt-right pipeline, this one called Alt-Right Pipeline, Individual Journeys to Extremism Online, identifies and describes 3 steps of right-wing online extremism. The first step is called normalization, where people become normalized to edgy humor and jokes about a group that the extremists want to see othered and dehumanized down the line. Memes and jokes, therefore, are a key medium of radicalization and cannot be trusted. The second step is acclimation. As the jokes become normalized, it establishes a new cognitive baseline for what is acceptable. Suddenly there's a new edge to ride, and the former introductionary YouTubers like Steven Crowder or Paul Joseph Watson, who are merely conservatives, appear to be too centrist for their taste. Their appetite for edgier content pushes them rightward. The final step is dehumanization, where finally the victim of the pipeline is able to commit violence against the targets of their ire, which began as simply edgy jokes. The paper uses the example of the Christchurch shooter saying sub to PewDiePie during the livestream of his attack, as evidence of this effect coming full circle. The paper describes this process as the collapse of the boundary between troll and extremist. Now, this happens sometimes, but not all the time. There are absolutely people who say edgy jokes and don't mean them, and they don't radicalize, and that's that. But more importantly, this is not unique to right-wing radicalization. This is how all radicalization works. Like Antifa or BLM attacking people and burning businesses, and yes, even killing people. The same 3 steps are present. Normalization. Eat the rich. By the way, we're just joking. Hashtag yes all men. Cis white boys are the problem. Acclamation. Shoe on head is a reactionary lib cuck. Vosh is rad. Oh, hold on. Vosh hides his power level too much. Maybe it's time to start watching some overtly tanky channels. Dehumanization. Let's actually start killing or attacking our political opponents in the streets, because we've been told by our favorite YouTubers that only power matters, and winning is better than principles.
You call it selling out your principles, I call it fucking winning. And that's my principle. To win as a socialist, not to lose as a socialist. That's not my principle. I don't give a fuck about principled failure. Principled failure is worth dog shit.
This mechanism that we're discussing, whatever it is, it's functioning on both sides of the aisle, but the left only complains about it when it happens in favor of the right. And I'm sure if the right held all the institutional power right now, they would only complain about it if it favored the left as well. So maybe we need to home in on something a bit more concrete. Each side is convinced that it has the truth and the other is tainted by propaganda. Which one of these views, if any, is actually mapping onto objective reality? There's another study called Algorithmic Extremism, examining YouTube's rabbit hole of radicalization, and it can probably help us cut through some of the bullshit. After categorizing nearly 800 political channels, we were able to differentiate between political schemas in order to analyze the algorithm traffic flows out and between each group. After conducting a detailed analysis of the recommendations received by each channel type, we can refute the popular radicalization claims. To the contrary, the data suggests that YouTube's recommendation algorithm actively discourages viewers from visiting radicalizing or extremist content. Instead, the algorithm is shown to favor mainstream media and cable news content over independent.
Don't open them. Hit that one.
Slants towards left-leaning or politically neutral channels. Our study thus suggests that YouTube's recommendation algorithm fails to promote inflammatory or radical content, as previously claimed by several outlets. So,
you're going to continue breaking me?
Effect moving people towards the right, it's not being caused by YouTube itself. There have been other studies that have come out over the years showing that the left has independently radicalized over time, since before even Trump came along. Each of these show similar results. The right has shifted a little bit rightward, but the left has absolutely spun itself off into crazy town. And again, if you were to confront a leftist with this data, they would say, of course, leftist radicalization is good. But that is not a good enough answer for me. And I have no answer. I have a hypothesis. I'm not entirely sure if it's true, but maybe. I've noticed that the broader left fervently believes in a unidirectional view of progress, that history is meant to move along the long, straight arrow of progress over time, and that arrow, of course, points to the left. They hold this belief because they view morality as if it were a science to be developed, the same as alchemy eventually became chemistry. Newtonian physics was replaced with general relativity, and so on. They see a steady march of history where kingdoms were replaced by republics, and republics will be replaced by socialist states, and eventually by a stateless, classless, moneyless, post-scarcity society. They see the gradual expansion of civil liberties, where slavery was made illegal, then serfdom abolished, then civil rights, and they envision a future of totalizing equality. Your average leftist will say something like, the left-right scale is a good-evil scale, and history in progress is meant to move leftward eternally over time with a straight face. To contrast, the right wing believes in a cyclical view of progress, that history moves in waves, empires ebb and flow, and that this is a natural occurrence that can't be escaped. They point to economics, where when people engage in a free market, there is natural inequality, and market forces will tend to see industries collapsing, and new enterprises appearing across large enough timeframes. They correctly point out that the West's great material wealth hasn't led to the widespread happiness that was assumed, and that more complicated lives may not necessarily be better for the common person. They don't consider a utopia on Earth to be possible the way that the left does, and they consider the world to be in a fallen state, whether that be for a religious reason, or due to the gradual loss of traditional culture to the passage of time. Your average rightist will say something like, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times with a straight face. In reality, Politics seems to operate like a swinging pendulum. One side pulls things too out of whack, the electorate ensures it swings back the other way in equal measure. This is more of a cyclical system than a unidirectional one, and the rightist view of the world seems to map more accurately onto the political sphere than the leftist one. For decades, the left has been march of progressing its way ever leftward. Moderates were left behind and labeled as reactionaries and fascists, and Trump was the snapback. There will likely be further snapbacks, like how we've seen Republican governors in the states become more brazen in their rightism recently. That doesn't mean that the leftist view of progress is completely wrong, though. Certainly with stuff like hard science, acquisition of knowledge, technology, or engineering, there is a more linear model of progress happening in those fields. But politics is a fundamentally different type of field. I think what we're seeing is certainly partially a radicalization rightward. People who are disillusioned by the left are absolutely prime targets to be scooped up and radicalized by rightist actors. But I don't think that's the main cause of what we're seeing. I think the big picture leftist view of progress in history does not map well onto politics. Scientific progress may be unidirectional, but politics isn't a science. Moving leftward eternally over time does not constitute true progress, especially when the left wants to regress into older failed ideas, like the economics of socialism or the tribalism of race and gender politics. So what's actually happening here, at least in my opinion, is that leftists are seeing regular people, even their own allies sometimes, rebuke their more radical elements. And in response, they're thinking, everyone's a Nazi. But what's actually happening is they're simply going too far. I think we all know this intuitively. 50 years ago, if you questioned authority, distrusted large corporations and governments, hated censorship, liked crass humor, thought schools brainwash kids, and wanted to focus on domestic issues, you were absolutely a hippie leftist. 20 years ago, you were a normal liberal. But today, holding those opinions will see leftists label you as a fascist. The alt-right pipeline exists, sure, in some minimal capacity, but the why I left the left, or the left left me behind narrative, explains what's actually going on here with far greater accuracy than the alt-right pipeline narrative. Leftoids don't want to admit it because they don't want to look in the mirror and understand that they're the cause of a lot of the problems that they're currently facing.
YouTube Music Premium is an experience that gives you complete control of your music. So you can listen ad-free, download music for offline play, and keep your songs playing in the background.
Do you remember way back in 2017 when everyone was obsessed with the alt-right? In the wake of Gamergate and
PragerU alt-right? What? They're saying that PragerU is alt-right? What the fuck is this? Alt-right, really? It's the kids are all right. So very. Bro.
at the dawn of the Trump presidency, we had identified this new political niche, this radical and sometimes dangerous movement that was gaining a lot of traction and somehow attracting swaths of young, mostly white men. And we spent years talking about it, dissecting it, figuring out who was leading the helm and what kind of rhetorical tactics they were using. We even had a fun little name for it. We called it the alt-right pipeline. But then stuff happened. There was a whole pandemic and an attempted coup.
An attempted coup?
For a while. Do you remember that? And as the world was burning, discussions of the alt-right and the pipeline that had created them were put aside. We had bigger fish to fry. Now, don't get me wrong. People are still talking about alt-right figures and radical rhetoric. But it feels different now, right? Like, we're still talking about it, but we've stopped asking questions about it. We think we have it all figured out. We know there's an alt-right pipeline, and we know where it's coming from. We know how they attract people. Or so we think.
What the
because,
fuck?
As it turns out, while we have been busy with, the alt-right pipeline has changed. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the alt-right and the new alt-right pipeline. And let's talk about the channel that's not just helped the pipeline stay open, but has even added
What a douche. Fucking kills me because he can't fucking win. What the fuck? Because he pulled a dick move and card blocked him, so I helped him. Alright, I'm killing fucking green. Alright. There we go.
Entrances with sleek matte branding stamped on the side. Let's talk about PragerU.
The new pipeline. Where?
Alright, so for those of you who may not be familiar, PragerU is a YouTube channel and conservative nonprofit whose goal is to funnel casual viewers toward their core right-wing messaging. And that's not an inference on my part either. I'm not putting words in their mouth.
Are you gonna break me? I was
it. But we have an important
If you break that other...
How
if you
does
break
PragerU
this, I'm
funnel their
fine.
viewers, and what makes their funnel different from the traditional
he
alt-right
didn't.
pipeline? Well, according to their marketing materials, their funnel looks like this. The mouth of the funnel opens with two types of videos: short educational videos and skits. They make 5-minute videos that are meant to look like clear, trustworthy educational resources about current events for people
Does
who might
black
want to
break
learn more
me?
about stuff going on in the news. And then they also make funny little TikToks and quick man-on-the-street clips for people looking for laughs. Both kinds of videos usually feature caricatures of leftists, or the most damning sound bites they could get from left-leaning people. And they're basically saying, hey, look how wild these opinions are. Aren't you glad you're not as radical as these crazy leftists? Which functions to make their educational content look moderate, or to make the left-leaning positions look absurd and funny. Once you've seen a couple of these videos, you might think, you know what, these are pretty funny or useful, I want to keep watching. And so you subscribe to their channel. Once they have your subscription, their content shows up on your YouTube home feed, and now you're not just getting their basic, broadly appealing content, but you're also getting their podcasts and their mini documentaries and their interviews with conservative figures. And maybe in one of their videos, they mention how YouTube is censoring their content, and that really piques your interest. What could they have said that was so bad that it got removed from the platform? So maybe you think, you know what, let me check out their website and see if I can find their censored content there. So you go to their website and you start watching their restricted videos playlist, and once you've spent a couple hours there, maybe you sit back and think, you know what? This is really solid. I can't believe that they're being unfairly censored by YouTube. How can I show my support? And so You browse the site and find a big donation link that tells you how, for only $35 a month, you can become a
None
member
of these guys are
Prager
like
United
alt-right
and
or
get
anything
quarterly
like that,
gift
though.
boxes and discounts for their merch store, because of course they have a merch store, and other perks and insider updates. And suddenly, you've become a paying member of the PragerU family. Now, this sounds pretty similar to the traditional alt-right pipeline, right? In the mid-2010s, disinformation and bigotry reached a fever pitch on YouTube. This was the age of angry, reactionary content creators who were anti-feminist, anti-SJW, and anti-PC. But these creators didn't pull viewers in by immediately inundating them with racist rhetoric or explicit calls to violence. They pulled them in using silly comedy videos and webcomics and movie reviews and gaming videos. Those were the videos that had mass appeal, and once you'd watched a video about how silly Anita Sarkeesian is, maybe you got a video about forced diversity in video games, and then you got one about immigration and white replacement theory. This is the exact same trajectory as PragerU's content funnel. So, what makes this new pipeline different from the old one? Well, the old pipeline was built on several different channels all working together to bring people in. But the thing about PragerU is that it's more like a traditional media company or TV network. They keep everything in-house. They have a monopoly on the pipeline. It's pretty much just them. And that's dangerous. PragerU features all these different right-wing creators and academics and speakers and just, like, normal people under the same banner with the same sleek editing and consistent branding. They advertise these speakers as experts and label themselves as a university.
I mean, they
if not a
are.
legit educational institution.
Yeah, I think that that's dumb that they label themselves as a university, because they're definitely not. But
Then at least like an alternative kind of school that has a budget and is really polished and put together. This consistent branding helps to make all of their speakers appear equivalent. PragerU features people from all across the spectrum of right-wing thought, and when they come together under the same banner, it makes them all look pretty moderate. When you have one video featuring former White House
they
Press
are
Secretary
pretty
Janet
moderate.
Carino, where she gives you advice on how to get through a quarter-life crisis, and then you have another video from noted political agitator and conspiracy theorist Charlie Kirk, where he explains
Oh my goodness.
universities are leftist cults and indoctrination centers.
They are.
Put on the same playing field, so they must be.
I don't even like
right?
Charlie Kirk, but like... What the fuck? What is...
A legit educational.
I'm confused with the Jew, with the Jewish symbol there.
Institution wouldn't platform total radicals, right? I mean, they talk to former White House press secretaries and CEOs and writers and politicians. By putting people like Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens and Steven Crowder next to actual politicians and moderate establishment Republicans, it makes those more radical voices seem less radical. In other words, PragerU's universal design language, the consistency of their presentation and branding across videos regardless of presenter, reinforces...
What are you doing?
Streaming? What are you doing?
Why?
Why am I streaming? Because I do most days.
Don't lie.
What do you mean?
No.
No what?
No, I don't have any. You don't love me?
Yeah, that's why I said.
Bye.
Alright, bye.
the notion that all of PragerU's content is equally legitimate. In this way, more radical figures like Dennis Prager and Candace Owens, along with Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin, are cast as equal participating members of the same institution as Ginny Thomas and Dana Perino.
I don't know who
PragerU inculcates a
Jimmy
chain
Thomas
of
and Dana
equivalence between
Perino.
the neoliberalism of Reagan, the neoconservatism of George W. Bush, the Tea Party, Trumpism, and key figures of the alt-right.
The Tea Party,
This also obfuscates
Trumpism.
the distinction between
And I like how they called the Tea Party and Trumpism, like, compared it to the alt-right, like saying that it was the
PragerU's
alt-right. What the
mainstream
fuck?
presenters and their radical counterparts.
Bro, the Tea Party is literally
essentially
like
allowing viewers
libertarians.
to sleepwalk from established orthodox conservatism
Trumpism
into
is like a bunch of
radicalism
different people.
without realizing it.
Like people who follow
PragerU's
Trump is
style
like a
also
bunch of
makes
different
all these
people.
figures appear more
All
qualified.
sorts of different.
You know how people used to make all those like,
Right-wing
fake Abraham Lincoln
people.
quotes and put them in those really like official looking meme formats with the big black box where the text is like next to the portrait? And then everyone on Facebook was like, oh yeah, that looks real, that's totally legit. That was definitely an Abraham Lincoln quote. That is what PragerU is doing. Their channel and website are really polished with nice matte colors and consistent branding. Most people know that Prager University isn't a real university, but they really do advertise themselves as an alternative educational institution. They're put together, and when they create content that looks like something a real university would make, their videos are a lot easier to swallow. PragerU unites the American right, from Reaganist orthodoxy to the alt-right. These ideas are presented
Oh my
using
good.
the
No,
same
they
wording
don't.
and are thus portrayed as
No, they don't.
equally legitimate.
The alt-right.
Sharing in
Bro, what the
Prager's
fuck does she think is alt-right? I'm confused with what she thinks is alt-right. Because maybe it's a completely different thing than what I think it is.
University.
Actually, I know she thinks it's a completely different thing than what I think it is. Ooh, mom.
status and slick presentation style. PragerU treats all its presenters as equal representatives of one institution. Basically, their content looks like something you'd see from Khan Academy or in a TED Talk, and that makes you trust them the same way you'd trust something that you heard from Khan Academy or in a TED Talk. It's
The fuck
just
is
that
Khan
with
Academy?
PragerU, the people that you're listening to aren't experts in their field or
Yeah, some of them are. Khan Academy.
Hi everyone, Sal Khan here, and I'm excited to announce that Khanmigo, our generative AI-powered tutor on Khan Academy, is now generally available. And this is especially powerful as we go into back to school.
I don't even like
That
PragerU.
if
I
you
think
have
PragerU's
Khanmigo,
stupid,
your student
but,
has it
like, what
on
the
their
fuck?
Khan Academy account, that they are going to be fully supported. They can ask questions not just on their Khan Academy work, about anything that they see in their schoolwork. But it will not cheat, it will not do their homework for them, but it will
Why is this person doing this? I'm confused with what their strategy is here. Are they gonna fucking slam them? Do it. Just go boom, boom, boom. No! You shitwad.
Or qualified scholars. They're news pundits and conspiracy theorists and discredited academics. So we have
doing
these
shit like that is gonna make it so
radical
black
right-wing
wins.
presenters who are featured next to establishment Republicans, which makes them seem less radical. They're on the same field as these others, so they can't be that bad, right? And then these presenters are given the same polish. Their radical beliefs are presented in official, sleek infographics. White supremacists don't use infographics. These people are taken seriously by institutions that make cute little animations.
White supremacists?
No one with cute little animations could really be that bad, right? Well, they are bad. They're just paying their graphic designers to make them look good. But that brings us to our next question. How did they get all this money for graphic designers anyway?
When it comes to fixing your car, shop carparts.com.
Because it's ran by a Jew.
PragerU has a budget of tens of millions of dollars. A lot of this money comes from...
And that's why they're all right, is because it's ran by a Jew. And that's why they have so much... Like, what the fuck?
Individual donations and from the conservative donor network. But a lot of their money also comes from YouTube. To understand how they took over right-wing YouTube, we first need to understand the algorithm.
You gotta take one more if you're...
So the
Otherwise
algorithm is built on connections. It's all about finding videos that connect to each other and all about, well, if you like this, then you'll probably like this other thing too. For an example of this, think of the Paul brothers. On their own, they may not have done as well, but because they made similar content and made it really obvious to the algorithm that they were connected, they were able to bounce off of each other and both able to sort of skyrocket to fame. This tactic was also used by the members of the original alt-right pipeline.
You mean also like how BreadTube does, or like any fucking group of YouTubers does? I'm confused. The fuck is this bitch talking about?
Like this chart shows, all of these various right-wing creators featured each other in their videos. They did collaborations, they went on each other's podcasts, they built each other up. And this is exactly what PragerU is doing. Sort of. See, PragerU isn't shouting out right-wing creators or telling you to subscribe to the Joe Rogan podcast. What PragerU is doing is bringing all of these creators in-house. And because PragerU has all these different videos of...
Yeah, look at all those fucking fascists,
See, PragerU isn't
bro.
shouting out right-wing creators or telling you to subscribe to the Joe Rogan podcast. What PragerU
Joe
is
Rogan
doing
podcast,
is bringing
yes.
all of
Oh,
these
right.
creators in-house. And because PragerU has...
Yes, all of these people. Look at them. Look at these people right here. That is what alt-right looks like. If you ever seen
has
something.
all these different videos about
what the
different
fuck are you
issues
talking
featuring
about, you
different
dumb bitch?
speakers from different parts of the right. Their videos are recommending more of their own videos. It's all internal. Instead of helping other channels grow, it's all feeding back into itself. So let's take a step back and take stock. PragerU is doing the same stuff that the first alt-right pipeline was doing, but doing it all themselves.
Wait, is it... Okay, this is the Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin. Alright, let's see. Richard Spencer. Okay. There's someone who I would consider alt-right. What is this fucking line here, though? I don't know who these two... Oh, Sargon Akkad. He's not alt-right. Millennial Woes. Never heard of them. Millennial Woes. I want to see if he has a, does he have a YouTube channel? Yeah, it doesn't have anything. I want to see if he actually is this. white supremacist. You see, whenever they say this, I end up just like not believing that they're a white supremacist because they label everyone a fucking white supremacist. I am out generating by quite a bit.
Doing it with a more widely cast net, doing it in a polished faux academic style, and exclusively reaping all of the rewards both algorithmically and monetarily. In other words, PragerU replicates the alt-right pipeline, but on a much larger scale. It broadens the network to include a much
Both of these are fake.
wider swath of the American right. And by placing the entire spectrum of right-wing politics under one roof with identical branding, it inculcates a sense of equivalence. In short, PragerU increases access to the alt-right and simultaneously mainstreams, legitimizes, and funds it. PragerU extends the radicalization pipeline to include the mainstream right, and then seeks to extend it further still, exposing more and more viewers to alt-right thinkers and priming them for even more radical positions. This is, in essence, the clear and present danger that PragerU poses. So, what do we do about this? Like, they're obviously bad and just getting worse as they grow, so we need to find a way to stop them, right? Well, one of the things we can do is what I'm doing. Response videos are good at raising awareness and making fun of some of the more absurd claims that PragerU makes, but they're also not necessarily serious takedowns of serious issues. So one of the other things that we can do as creators is to use some of the tactics that they use, but in our own stuff. They have found this great way to help themselves grow and to take over the algorithm. They know how to manipulate those connections that YouTube looks for when figuring out what to recommend to people. Now, I know that we can't all feature each other in all of our videos, but making more connections and doing more collaborations can only help. Something else that is severely lacking, though, is scholarly research. I want you to guess how many scholarly papers mention PragerU.
Are they gonna break
Not
me?
just like about the concept of the alt-right pipeline, and not even solely about PragerU, just that mention PragerU. Guess, 100? 1,000? More?
It's like,
Put it in the
break me and I
comments.
run through your fucking troops.
Well, the answer
I run through all
is
of that.
5.
What?
I can count the number of scholarly papers that mention PragerU on one hand. And 2 of those papers aren't even published yet. I actually had the opportunity to meet with a few researchers who are really diving into PragerU, and I used 2 of their soon-to-be published papers for this video. One of their papers is forthcoming in the journal Patterns of Prejudice, and the other is forthcoming in Identities, but is still in the review process because academic publishing is a whole thing right now. So big shout out to Rob and Tom at the University of Sussex. Thank you folks so much for doing this work. It is incredible and really helpful. But even with these papers, there is still a massive gap in the research here. And this has some pretty dire implications. Like, if no one questions PragerU, then are they just free to do whatever they want? If no one is keeping tabs on them and measuring the impact they have, then how will we ever really know what kinds of effects their massive media empire has? This research gap is a huge issue and definitely needs to be addressed. So if you're a social scientist or graduate student who studies this kind of thing, then consider diving into the world of PragerU and the effects that they have on the new right. Because until we have a handle on who they are and what they're doing, we won't be able to combat their misleading and dangerous misinformation. And if you are interested in doing scholarly research in this area and you want to reach out to the authors of the papers that I've cited here, I have been given full permission to post an email address in the description, so feel free to get in touch with them. And thanks again to Rob and Tom for sharing their work and being a part of this project. It would not have been possible without you two. The last suggestion I have for how to move forward is to support the folks who are actively working toward changing education. Not just providing a counter to PragerU, but actually trying to change the foundations of how we think about education.
The fuck are you talking about, bitch? Bro, brush your teeth.
And that's where the
They're
Human Restoration
nasty.
Project
Look
comes
at
in.
those things. Ew.
The Human Restoration Project is a nonprofit that aims to illuminate, foster, and challenge traditional and progressive educational practices by bringing the humanity back into education. They have a conference coming up, and they've actually sponsored today's video so that I can spread the word about the event, because I know my audience. I know that y'all are a bunch of nerds, and most of you are interested in how we can make systemic change and fix, you know. So the Conference to Restore Humanity is an all-virtual international conference open to educators at any level, and it's happening from July 25th to the 28th. The folks at HRP believe that an academic conference that's accessible, sustainable, and representative is way overdue. So the Conference to Restore Humanity is their way of combating that, because it's been purposefully designed around accessibility and sustainability of virtual learning. This basically translates to more Q&As with the presenters and more engagement both during and after the conference. The content covered during the conference includes restorative justice, anti-racism, anti-carceral education, childism, neurodivergence in schools, and going gradeless, which y'all know that I'm definitely here for. So if you are an educator interested in learning about and discussing these topics with other educators, then this is the academic conference for you. If this sounds like something you want to get in on, then go to humanrestorationproject.org/conference, which I have linked in the description, and use promo code ZOEB to get $25 off your ticket price. I'll be getting a little kickback if you use this code when you check out, so not only will you be getting a discount, but you will also be helping to support the channel. Again, that's humanrestorationproject.org/conference using promo code ZOEB. And if you want to learn more about the awesome folks over at the Human Restoration Project, then you can follow them on Twitter at
Why nerds join the alt-right? Let's see this one.
What are you going to watch now that the big game is over? How about more mind-blowing matchups? Breakout block.
Content note. This video focuses on how nerdy online spaces became rife with fascists, and therefore discusses their beliefs. Content warning for transphobia, ableism, racism, anti-Semitism, and sexism. Please proceed with caution. Before I begin, I want to state that this video and its script was inspired by
Oh, this guy sucks, bro.
Innuendo Studios video How to Radicalize a Normie, The Pootie Pipeline by Non-Compete, and The Rise and Fall of Geek Culture by Sarah Zed. These are by far my favorite videos on YouTube, especially How to Radicalize a Normie, so if you haven't seen them yet, please go and check them out. In this video, I want to bring up points that these creators made in their videos, but obviously add my own insight as someone who has spent my own time in nerdy fandom spaces.
How do you radicalize
my thesis
a normie?
Is that due to the rise in mainstream popularity of once nerdy subcultures during the early 2000s, cis-het white male nerds who tied their entire oppressed identity to their geeky niche interests were especially vulnerable to alt-right political ideology, as the properties they knew and loved came under widespread scrutiny, and how once everyone was a self-proclaimed nerd, no one was. So without further ado, let's go.
What?
So, what is a nerd? Well, if you Google the definition, it reads, a person who is extremely enthusiastic and knowledgeable about a particular subject, especially one of specialist or niche interest. The word geek, which is sometimes used interchangeably with the word nerd, has a similar definition. A geek is a person who is knowledgeable about and obsessively interested in a particular subject, especially one that is technical or of specialist or niche interest. The difference is that geeks typically are knowledgeable about tech, like computer geeks, for example. Remember the Geek Squad? While nerds are into intellectual pursuits, like reading high fantasy books. There are also dorks and losers, and some people take these labels really seriously. In fact, if you're one of those people, you might be a nerd. Haha. I actually found dozens of articles from the late 2000s and early 2010s trying to discern the minute differences between geeks, losers, nerds, hipsters, and dorks, but in the end, it doesn't really matter. All of these words are describing the same type of person, that for the purposes of this video, I'm going to call a geek or a nerd. A person who is really enthusiastic about something or various things that aren't necessarily seen as acceptable interests by the mainstream. Think D&D, Magic the Gathering, role-playing games, cosplay, complex puzzles, comic books, manga, anime, video gaming, high fantasy and sci-fi works, etc. It's common for nerds or geeks to fixate on certain intellectual properties or on different facets of the world around them, like knowing a lot about flags, for instance, or about an obscure book, or how computers work, etc. And though some of these interests may be acceptable, the hobby tends to go too far from an outsider's perspective, and thus people like this are seen as odd, and are unfortunately mocked for their personal interests and their enthusiasm for said interest. Yes, in short, nerds are people who get mocked for being excited about things that make them happy. This happens at school to children and teens, but also to adult nerds, who may spend their money on action figures, card games, or cosplays that are meaningless to the average person, but are worth every cent to the owner. People who fall under the labels of nerd or geek may also be a bit socially awkward or neurodivergent, but not all the time. The widely successful show The Big Bang Theory is at times called nerd blackface for how it creates caricatures of nerds for the audience to laugh at. Whether you agree with the term blackface being used here or not is up to you. I personally don't think it's comparable, and we should just call the show for what it is, ableist, sexist, and racist. But in all, the series begs us to
How is it ableist, sexist, and racist? The fuck are you talking about? Shut up.
look at how sad these adult men are for their childish interests, laugh at how they never got over their high school trauma, laugh at Sheldon's autistic coding. So because of social ridicule, either at the expense of the nerds' interests in niche cultural artifacts, or at their seeming social ineptitude, or both, it's no wonder that gatekeeping arouses around nerd culture, why nerds and geeks fight over labels of what to call themselves, and who gets to be a part of fandom. But in general, nerd communities and fandom spaces are happy places where people can make friends with others who have the same interests as them. It's especially good for people who have a hard time breaking the ice with others, like those who are neurodivergent, because the ice is already broken. Plus, being really fixated on something is seen as normal in these spaces, rather than weird. In addition, people already at the margins of society, people of color, people who are neurodivergent, and people who identify as LGBTQ+, gravitate towards nerdy interest because they want to get lost in another world, since the world they currently inhabit is actively hostile to them. And whether they get lost in coding, sewing cosplays, reading comics, or analyzing a great number of things, having an escape in your own community of people who share traits and interests feels good. And though fandom is very diverse with people from all walks of life, when people tend to think of nerds or geeks, most people think of cishet white dudes. Hence the reason The Big Bang Theory is hated so much. It whitewashed nerd and fandom culture. You might think of black nerds like Urkel or Carlton or Raj from the previously mentioned series, but in all, nerd representation in media tends to lean pretty white. And you might be wondering, why is that?
Listen, paying $14.99 a month.
I overextended my troops.
for a streaming app, and $9.99 a month for a music app, and $12.
After I just explained how diverse nerds are? Well, it's hard to give one definitive answer, but I'll try to do so here. Firstly, the properties that most fandoms form around
I might die right here. Let's see.
are of cishet white dudes, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and Harry Potter. So it makes sense for people to think that people who like Luke Skywalker also look like him. You might find it ironic that people of marginalized identities tend to so strongly fan over work that doesn't have many people of color in them or diversity in general, but it makes sense if you think about how these sci-fi and fantasy works create a new world, where fans can insert themselves and create their own rules. In addition, sci-fi works like Star Trek champion diversity and inclusivity rather than shy away from it. Also, sci-fi and fantasy works lend themselves well to reinterpretations.
I'm confused with what that split
Thus, there's
was.
opportunities to make media more inclusive and evolve it as time goes on, as many nerdy
Are they gonna
properties
break
tend to be
me?
older and aren't always the most progressive.
No?
Secondly, the studios who create these beloved properties just tend to put white fans at the forefront because that's where the money's at. That's why Disney made sure not to make Finn a Jedi, why they took Kelly Marie Tran off Star Wars merch, and why just this year they started selling Rey's the yellow lightsaber when the series wrapped years ago. So much for progressive reboots. But I did say they had the opportunity, I never said they actually took it, unfortunately. But of course, it's not just white male fans, white female fans can be just as ruthless. Look at how they reacted to when Rue became black in the Hunger Games adaptations, when in fact she was always black. Not to mention the whitewashing of Katniss, who is olive skin in the books, but portrayed by a white actress.
Does it say that she's olive skin in the books? Let's see what happens here. Does he just break me? Huh. Huh.
A vehicle like the Hunger Games would have been huge for an actress of color, but of course they gave it to a white woman. Thirdly, white male fans just push themselves to the front. Unsurprisingly enough, they're very
my
entitled.
goodness.
They're the ones who
White male fans just push themselves to the front. Shut the fuck up. I should have used the...
to do the gate.
I should have used the slider. I always forget to do that. Does red break? Me? Or do they... Oh, no, they just... Let's see what happens here.
Gatekeeping, who have to know more than you do, who police other fans, and other nerds. This was best illustrated during the My Little Pony Friendship is Magic days, when the white male fan base was saying who and who doesn't get
bronies. It's a bunch of bronies, my guy.
to be a fan of MLP, a franchise that many women and girls propped up for decades. The show and its merch ended up catering itself to the male fans, even getting rid of the brushable hair on the toy ponies for a while, which was a staple of the brand. Instead, they opted to create plastic collectible minifigs that male fans were more inclined to buy. Lastly, and most obviously, white male nerd representation is so rampant in Hollywood media because writers' rooms are filled with white men. They're the ones
Oh yeah, because they are really good at writing.
Getting the chances
Dumb
to make their
shit.
stories known. Revenge of the Nerds, Freaks and Geeks, and characters like Dwight and even the nerds of the Big Bang Theory are white, or at least almost all white, because that's white male privilege at work.
Oh
so
my
we now
goodness.
know how
This
and
is
why
one of the
these type
dumbest
men are
videos
the
I've ever
people we think
watched.
of nerds, but now I want to explore why these white men who dominate fandom spaces and whose money is able to sway multi-million-dollar franchises feel as if they're marginalized.
You're gonna go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. And I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that won't be true. It'll be because you're an asshole.
Some nerdy white men feel oppressed as adults because they never properly coped with what happened to them in high school. They were bullied for their geeky interests, and that effed them up. And that's perfectly fair. A lot of us haven't gotten over our high school trauma and the
I wasn't bullied for my geeky interests. I was bullied because I'm autistic. No, I'm just kidding.
expectations of being a man are impossible to live up to. You have to be an athlete, a breadwinner, great in bed, have tons of sexual partners, have tons of money, and be emotionally stoic. No one can be all of those things at once, if at all. But rather than trying to work through toxic masculinity, these types of men blame women and other marginalized people for their problems and for why the world is doomed. And in high school and college, they vowed, once they grew up, to become the oppressor. The new male power fantasy of the late 20th century and later the new millennia wasn't to shed your nerdy outer shell and transform into an alpha male, but to embrace your geekiness and use it to get the house, the car, and most importantly, the girl of your dreams. And this change coincided, of course, with the rise of the computer and the digital age, when STEM fields, as well as finance, were the new tickets to success. It's the revenge of the nerds, if you will. The smart is the new sexy that was promised to the tech bros and geeks. In fact, that's when these terms nerd and geek really took off, after the invention of the teenager and after the baby boom. This is when you see the rise of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and later Bezos, Musk, and Zuckerberg pioneering the digital age. What was promised with the coming of the internet was egalitarianism, but that was far from what transpired. It was, of course, upper middle class white male geeks who had the time, the access, and the privilege to spend their days working on computers who reap the benefits of computing, not the working class who didn't have the ability to risk it all for something unforeseeable. But instead of seeing themselves as in the right place at the right time, lucky and privileged enough to have a head start, they continued to view themselves as underdogs. They, to this day, see themselves as disruptors, who sell their stories as the nerdy kids who finally got what they deserved. When in reality, these men always had what they were promised, they just thought they didn't because they were bullied for playing video games and they didn't get the cheerleader. And before we continue, I want to say that though toxic masculinity is oppressive, it also doesn't mean that men are faultless and not responsible for their actions, especially when they work to reproduce the system that hurt them. Additionally, I'm not saying that all white men look up to these figures or that all white men ended up wildly rich like Mark and Jeff did, far from it, but that there's a subset of the white male population who, like these examples, also feel angry that they didn't get what they were entitled to by virtue of being white men. This is detailed in Pop Culture Detective's Adorkable Misogyny video, where they talk about how some nerdy or geeky men are rejected by masculinity. They can't fit in and are dubbed nerds, geeks, or dorks. They're different from male nerds who purposely reject traditional masculinity in that these so-called nerds actually really try hard to fulfill their patriarchal role. They want to fit in and are upset that they can't. They're resentful towards women and minorities and don't align themselves with them, even though they know what it's like to be bullied for things.
Bro. What the fuck
That
is
all
this
white
bitch
men look up
saying?
to these figures, or that all white men ended up wildly rich like Mark and Jeff did. Far from it. But that there's a subset of the white male population who, like these examples, also feel angry that they didn't get what they were entitled to by virtue of being white men. This is detailed in Pop Culture Detective's Adorkable Misogyny video, where they talk about how some nerdy or geeky men are rejected by masculinity. They can't fit in and are dubbed nerds, geeks, or dorks. They're different from male nerds who purposely reject traditional masculinity in that these so-called nerds actually really try hard to fulfill their patriarchal role. They want to fit in and are upset that they can't. They're resentful towards women and minorities and don't align themselves with them, even though they know what it's like to be bullied for things out of your control. But because they can't achieve masculinity through the traditional routes, through women, money, or athleticism, they embrace nerddom and fandom because in those spaces they can be superior. They can be the ones who know it all. And then they're tolerated because they like the same stuff you do. And I just want to bring home here that not all white male nerds are like this, and that there are a lot of them who don't fall into this resentful category, white men who are confident in themselves and reject so-called traditional masculine values. But there are some white men who are vengeful, and they can't be ignored because these self-declared nerds and geeks were the same men who later became part of an ever-growing fascist movement. To conclude this section, there's a subset
What the
of
fuck is the
cis-het white male
fascist
nerds who
movement
wear
that
the
you're
geek
talking
label and are
about?
actually
She hasn't even explained what the fascist movement is. She basically said that fucking, that Big Bang Theory is fascist.
oppressed by
Like, what the
toxic
fuck?
masculinity, but turn their backs on liberal ideology as a way to free themselves and instead embrace the right because that's where they have the most to gain and where their entitlement is legitimized. In addition, this demographic of people are the ones who don't really have to do anything about injustice or oppression. They have no skin in the game and just want to juxtapose themselves against actual underprivileged people because it benefits them. It positions them as nice guys, as victims, with a seemingly noteworthy cause, when in reality they're choosing to wallow in hate and misery because if they actually see the truth, that they're privileged and that there's a way out, it will destroy them. And that's because they tie their nerdy interests heavily to their identity and see them as the reason as to why they're oppressed, rather than, again, the capitalist patriarchy. So because these interests are so integral to who they are as people, when you critique something that they like, whether it be an anime, a manga, or a comic, they take it as a personal slight, a threat to their identity, and worse, to their moral characters and supposed subjugation. So naturally, these types of people who tie their identity and moral worth as well as societal mistreatment to their personal interests rejoiced when their niche interests were popularized in the mainstream at the dawn of the 21st century. I'm kidding, of course. They hated it. Though I think at first many were excited to have their favorite works brought to life and finally get the big screen adaptations that they deserve, I also think the white people in these spaces felt a little taken aback. They began to see that these nerdy properties like X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman, Lord of the Rings, and Game of Thrones didn't just appeal to a small select few who were in the know, but in fact had mass appeal. Which wasn't really a secret. Star Wars Mania proved that, and in fact the prequel trilogy came out around this time. However, the perceived problem was that everyday people seemed to like the same things as these so-called losers did. And when that happened, the nerds, the geeks, and the dorks had lost the thing that made them seem like they had a legitimate cause. Which again, these men do have a legitimate cause to fight against, but they also actively choose to place blame on anything else but the hand that feeds them. The biggest titles of the early 2000s were based on Marvel Comics, like the Spider-Man trilogy, and DC Comics with the Dark Knight series, and of course, like I mentioned before, the much-awaited Star Wars prequels. X-Men was also released along with 2 other movies. And of course, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy became some of the most awarded movies in history. For better or for worse, The Big Bang Theory, which premiered in 2007, also helped mainstream nerd culture, even if some people saw it as appropriative, since they both mocked the nerdy things that the characters liked, and also the characters themselves were called not nerdy enough because they just liked mainstream pop culture things. I personally don't like that last take as much because it gatekeeps what you have to like and know to be considered a nerd, when I think the label is based more on one's enthusiasm and dedication rather than the properties you're interested in. But anyway, the show itself is known for having big name stars that geeks in science and tech bros would be familiar with, like Adam West, James Earl Jones, Carrie Fisher, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and many more. Though I will say I don't think many actual nerds like Musk, Gates, or Tyson. Yes, actual non-
Musk, Gates, or Tyson.
themselves were called not nerdy enough because they just liked mainstream pop culture things. I personally don't like that last take as much because it gatekeeps what you have to like and know to be considered a nerd, when I think the label is based more on one's enthusiasm and dedication rather than the properties you're interested in. But anyway, the show itself is known for having big name stars that geeks in science and tech bros would be familiar with, like Adam West, James Earl Jones, Carrie Fisher, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and many more. Though I will say I don't think many actual nerds like Musk, Gates, or Tyson. Marvel Comics, like the Spider-Man trilogy, and DC Comics with the Dark Knight series, and of course, like I mentioned before, the much-awaited Star Wars prequels. X-Men was also released along with 2 other movies. And of course, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy became some of the most awarded movies in history. For better or for worse, The Big Bang Theory, which premiered in 2007, also helped mainstream nerd culture, even if some people saw it as appropriative, since they both mocked the nerdy things that the characters liked, and also the characters themselves were called not nerdy enough because they just liked mainstream pop culture things. I personally don't like that last take as much because it gatekeeps what you have to like and know to be considered a nerd, when I think the label is based more on one's enthusiasm and dedication rather than the properties you're interested in. But anyway, the show itself is known for having big name stars that geeks in science and tech bros would be familiar with, like Adam West, James Earl Jones, Carrie Fisher, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and many more. Though I will say I don't think many actual nerds like Musk, Gates, or Tyson. Yes, actual non-toxic nerds exist. Despite this video focusing on bad faith actors or nerds who are bigoted, fandom is also filled with great people who are nothing like these people who are the focus of this video. But going back to the aforementioned TV show, even though some nerds at the time hated The Big Bang Theory, post-2016 election, I think that it actually does a pretty accurate job at depicting how freaking terrible nerd culture can be, albeit by accident. It almost makes you wonder if the backlash by some nerds was done purposefully so we wouldn't take the time to dissect the real problems with geek culture presented in the show. However, the series is also extremely annoying in that it wants to have its cake and eat it too. They want us to sympathize with the same people who harass the women in their lives and who make racist remarks to their friends. In addition, Sheldon is heavily coded to be autistic, but rather than embracing that part of him, it's used as a comedic element. And not only that, but it's used to make him hyper-sexist and hyper-racist because he just can't help it. Being neurodivergent doesn't...
How is he hyper-racist? I've never heard him be hyper-racist once. Maybe hyper-sexist. But, like, rightfully so. Being sexist is...
automatically make you a racist and sexist pig with no filter, and being on the autism spectrum doesn't give you a free pass to just say the worst things ever either.
Yes, it does!
The show relies on Sheldon's quirks, as they're called, as the show never diagnoses him, to get away with a lot of non-PC jokes, as well as to mock nerds and people with autism. This is mainly because Chuck Lorre has some vendetta against nerds, and rather than making a show about how awesome they are, they just do the opposite of that. But going back to my thesis...
Does he really have a vendetta against nerds, or is she just saying that? I'm confused.
The mainstreaming of nerd culture upset fans who like to gatekeep and therefore saw this rise of geek culture as appropriative and became angry that liking nerdy stuff was becoming in vogue. After years of being told that your interests are unimportant and cringy, I get how it can feel hypocritical that the person who bullied you for enjoying things now enjoys those same things. Though I should note that even though things like superheroes and fantasy books and even role-playing games became more normalized, there's still a line. I don't think people who are obsessed with anime or people who are furries are seen as cool, even though Converse did use fursuits to advertise their shoes in 2019.
What?
In all, the rise in popularity of
That's fucking disgusting. They use furries to advertise?
stereotypically geeky properties made white cishet nerds and geeks look in the mirror and see that, wait a second, they had privilege all along.
Yes, fuck them up.
So with greater popularity of the things that they liked, white cishet nerds didn't just lose the part of their identity that was tied to their perceived oppression, they also faced the double whammy of having their beloved franchises and intellectual properties ruined by critics. And these critics were empowered with a new place to voice their concerns. The internet,
now break him.
Which by the 2010s was now widely available and used by millions of people. Of course, criticism of these works already existed from fans and non-fans, but now the larger public had a say as well. The criticism came from both bad faith critics who solely wanted to ruin your childhood for money by pointing out flaws in media that were never actually flaws, and from what would later be known as SJW critics by the right, or people who wanted to point out more pernicious or problematic elements in nerd culture in order to identify them, so creators and studios stopped perpetuating the same tired, sexist, racist, trans, and homophobic tropes. The rise of nerd culture wonderfully collided with fourth wave feminism, which led some people to cheer, while others called BS. If you're familiar with this story, you already know about Anita Sarkeesian, who sought to bring awareness about sexist tropes in video games and film. She, a video game herself, even...
Who's Anita Sarkeesian? I mean, isn't this what started Gamergate? But I don't know who that is. Anita Sarkeesian. House video and was a feminist website. The house seems cringe. Very cringe. No wonder she got a bunch of hate.
Conceded that, and say it with me, it's both possible and even necessary to simultaneously enjoy media while also being critical of its more problematic and pernicious aspects. But even with this conceit in every single video, she was dogpiled, doxxed, and sent death threats. She received non-stop hate from men who felt threatened by this brave new world where women were having a bigger and bigger say in fandom and pop culture. And even though they could never say it out loud, at the bottom of these angry video game nerds' hearts, they knew the concerns and criticisms were all valid, which is why it felt to them as though they personally were being attacked for liking things with problems. This examination of the properties that made them happy cut into them deeply, mainly because they simply saw them as an escape and entertainment. Since they're the hegemonic default as cishet white males, it's harder for them to see any real problems with the things that they enjoy. In addition, as we've discussed before, they tie these properties to their oppression, and when they realize that what they like actually isn't oppressing them, and in fact oppressing others, they shut down. And this leads us to the last and most important reason as to why they can't take criticism of their favorite works, and that's because they see them as part of who they are.
I think I try to get the... Can I get the kill yet? No, I can't yet.
If they like something that's problematic, that must mean that they too are problematic, even if that's not necessarily true. Just because you like something with problems doesn't make you a bad person, but to people like this, it's all one and the same, and therefore they must die on this hill that whatever they like is flawless, and that you're just complaining about nothing, or being too sensitive, or a number of other excuses to not reflect on what they've constructed their identity around. And honestly, I blame nerd and geek culture for this bad faith take that if you like something with problems, you're quote-unquote stupid or a bad person. Like if I said I like Beauty and the Beast back then, someone might say, so you endorse bestiality? And this was an actually very clever tactic used by bad faith critics all the time to make you hate criticism of anything and to eventually stop criticism and critics altogether. It was a technique used by angry men who didn't like the fact that their favorite show was being attacked, as they also saw this as a personal attack. So they decided to subject everyone to this horrible way of thinking to make it impossible to critique anything because no one wants to be called a bad person. So therefore nothing is really bad or needs to be critiqued or fixed. Let's just go back to enjoying things. These angry nerds
Is he gonna
wanted to
keep
make
going? He is. Yes. Exactly what I wanted. I don't ever get why people split that.
Of the things that they enjoy look ridiculous. And through bad faith takes, they did just that. They diminished the value there is to be had in criticism. So
Do I think I could
would
get...
also devalue criticism. Not to mention, with a slew of bad takes, it made it harder to discern what good faith criticism was. One of the worst side effects of nerd culture going mainstream, in my opinion, was tying your morality to the media you consume. But thankfully, for the most part, that era of criticism has finally subsided. Now let's talk about the nerd to fascist pipeline, or how machine learning algorithms radicalized nerds to the alt-right in the 2010s. Basically, this system is the end result of everything we've been talking about. Firstly, you have some angry cis-het white nerds internalize the late 20th and early 21st century patriarchal male power fantasy of going from lowly nerd to tech millionaire. From there, they become even angrier when they become disillusioned with that dream, since only a small handful of geeks and nerds ever actually achieved capitalistic success. But rather than blame the capitalist patriarchy and toxic masculinity, they begin to believe that their oppression stems from the content they enjoy and identify with, and turn themselves into victims. But then this narrative too becomes disrupted.
Yes!
When later the same material that they based their identity on became widely loved and accepted, thus making these men even more spiteful. This fire then continued to be stoked via the mass onslaught of criticism of said properties due to fourth wave feminism and online activism. And thus, the alt-right, as opportunistic as ever, saw a new recruiting base primed to see their...
So now I think I can get the kill. I think I can get the 2 kills. Yeah, I should be able to. If he hits me right there like that, then I can get the 2 kills. Hopefully he does. Come on, hit me. You just need to do one more. Bro. Bruv. I would feel bad, but I could kill red, kill green. I mean, kill black. There we go. That was bad. That was a shitty endgame play that I did, but I'll still win because I have so much more troops.
New wave fascist movement as a place of refuge, and both directly and indirectly brought angry white men over through creating content on platforms whose addicting algorithms work by suggesting the same content over and over, and by infiltrating online fandom spaces where these types of nerds typically hang out. The pipeline I'm going to describe is basically the pipeline that Ian Danskin from Innuendo Studios illustrated in their video entitled How to Radicalize a Normie, mixed with the pyramid of violence from the Pootie Pipeline by Non-Compete,
Pootie
but I've
Pipeline.
also added in some of my own details. So with all that said, let's take a stroll.
The Barbershop. Cremo Barber Grade is a promise. It's a commitment to outstanding quality. The Barbershop is a place of trust and reliability where you know you're in good hands. Cremo is inspired by barbers and make products they would be proud to use. Our products embody the spirit of the barbershop that you can use in your daily routine. From stylish hair and amazing beards to a sleek, sharp shave. When you use Cremo, you'll look and feel your best. Cremo, astonishingly superior.
Let's say you're just a regular cishet white guy on the internet in the 2010s who describes themselves as a nerd. You have geeky interests, you go to conventions, you're a part of various fan forums, and have friends online who share your love of niche subcultures.
There we go.
But that's all that really binds you to these fan groups and friends. Your shared
I don't
love of
think
X,
anyone
Y, or
was
Z.
really that
You don't
good
really
in that.
talk about your personal life or politics, even though you know a lot of the people in
Ooh,
this
Green
space
was a
are
master?
politically left-leaning.
I don't even remember what happened to Green. Black was an expert. Alright, I think I'm done for the day. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.